and welcome to the Actual Tech Media MegaCast. My name is Jess, and I am excited to be here with you all today. But before we jump into our content, I have some basic information to cover with you. Let's kick off our day here today by taking a quick tour of your audience console. And we're going to start with the questions window. Now, if you haven't already said hi, there is a whole audience of cool humans out there, so reach out and give a wave to the other members of the Actual Tech Media community. Also, keep in mind that if you have any tech issues today, a browser refresh is going to fix just about anything. But if those tech gremlins are clinging on, no problem. Just throw a comment in the question section and our crew will be there to help. We also want this to be an informative webinar for you. So throughout today's MegaCast, we hope you'll get engaged and ask all of your burning questions. Not only will we have team members responding to you over live chat, we will also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of our presentations. And if we do not get to your question during the webinar, don't worry, because the awesome experts that we have here with us today will be following up with you after we wrap. All right, next up on our tour, there are going to be lots of cool aha moments in the MegaCast today, and if you want to share those with your community, we've made it nice and easy for you. You can use the Twitter button right there in your audience console, and the hashtag for today's MegaCast will automatically get added to your post. And our last stop on this guided tour, be sure to check out the Handouts tab for some resources and takeaways from our speakers here today. We have an info pack collection of solution briefs, white papers, data sheets, free trials, ebooks, upcoming webinars, and more. So many great resources, so be sure to go explore. And if that wasn't enough fun, we also have some exciting prizes we will be giving away throughout the MegaCast today. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about those later on, but a few quick reminders for you all. You do need to be in attendance here live at the webinar in order to qualify to win a prize, and we will follow up with all winners after we wrap the MegaCast today. Now, all winners must submit an IRS Form W-9 to Actual Tech Media, and all winners must meet the Actual Tech Media prize terms and conditions. Now, hey, if you're not sure what those are, no problem. You can find the full T's and C's in that Handouts tab. Again, just click into the Handouts section, scroll down to the bottom, and you'll find the full T's and C's waiting for you there. Now, the absolute most important thing to remember here today is that we love getting all your insightful questions during these live webinars. In fact, we love it so much that we have a special additional prize for all you inquisitive folks out there. In today's MegaCast, we will be giving away a prize for the best question asked in each of our sessions. Now, the expert speakers and teams will review all the questions asked after the webinar, which means that even if your question does not get read out in a live session, there is still a chance to win. If you are a lucky winner here today and would like to donate the value of your prize, we have several wonderful organizations that we partner with. So let us know when we follow up about winning, and we will get that rolling for you. Again, we are so happy to have you all here with us live at the MegaCast today, and we want to keep that good feeling going. So let's connect on social. Reach out and connect with Actual Tech Media on Twitter and LinkedIn. We have lots of great content, and we always want to hear from you. Now, if you're looking for more awesome content right away after we wrap, you want to jump right in, make sure that you subscribe to the Actual Tech Media channel on YouTube. Another fun way to win a prize and to grow this awesome community is to refer an industry friend or coworker to the Actual Tech Media webinar series. Now, you're going to find a link to do that right there in that Handouts tab, and you will also be automatically redirected after we wrap today. Now, both you and your coworker, your friend, could win a prize, and we actually hold those drawings every month. So be sure you refer somebody awesome before you head out today. It could quite literally be a win-win situation. Next, we have a cool opportunity for the decision makers out there to get connected with new and emerging tech and innovative vendors. Here's how it works. All you need to do is click on the link in your Handouts tab and fill out the application. Then the Actual Tech crew will match you with some vendors that we think you should be chatting with based on your needs. There will also be fun opportunities that you can choose to join in, like surveys or test running new solutions, extended demos, and so on. You'll get some chances to win extra prizes, you'll chat with great people, and you will learn about the hottest new trends in tech. So be sure to apply, or hey, send that link to a decision maker in your team. Now, I want to take a quick minute here to remind you about one of my favorite resources, and that is ransomware.org. You can find everything you need to know about ransomware, how to prepare, how to prevent and recover. The site is jam-packed with information, helpful tips, checklists, strategic approaches, case studies, everything you need in one place. So wherever you are in your ransomware preparedness journey, there is something for you at ransomware.org. So go check it out and start exploring. All right, I have one more exciting resource I have to tell you about today, and that is the Gorilla Guide Book Club. It's going to give you access to free enterprise IT books authored by top industry experts, so you can stay up to date on trending enterprise technology. And yes, these books are going to work on your Kindle, your mobile device, and they are completely free, super easy. You can download these awesome resources at gorilla.guide, and there's a link for you in the handouts tab as well. Okay, well, we've covered a lot of important things already, and I don't know about you all, but I am excited to dive in. So let's get rolling.
Thank you, Jess. I am just as excited as you are. As hard as that is to believe, because you are always very excited. Thanks, everyone, and welcome to the Actual Tech Media MegaCast. Today's topic is defense, in depth exploring the elements of a layered security program. I want to start by saying a big thank you for joining us. And I see lots of you out there today. I see Simon from LA and AJ from Maine, Anil from Illinois, Greg from Atlanta, another Greg from Texas. I see Justin. You are not too late, Justin. Ginger from Charlotte. Thanks so much for being here, everyone. Jeffrey from Atlanta, several Atlanta folks, Jose from California, James from New York City, where I have a daughter right now cooking up a storm. James from New York City, William from Stone Mountain, Georgia, and so many more. Thank you all for being here today. And if you haven't told us who you are and where you're logging in from, please do that right now because we want to know. All right, on the MegaCast today, folks, we have got some of the most innovative leading companies in the industry. Look at the lineup right there. Veeam, Okta, Cisco, Duo, Rubrik, Census, Druva, and Teleport. That is what I call an amazing roster, like just a killer lineup. Now, this also means that we have got a long day ahead of us, folks. So get your favorite beverage, get comfortable. If you got a lazy boy or something, kick your feet back because we're going to be here a while and you are going to learn a ton. As for me, well, I am that guy, second from the bottom there, Keith Ward. I am one of the moderators here at Actual Tech Media, and I am so excited to be with you today. I am just one member, though, of what we call the Great Mod Squad, and that also includes Jess Steinbach, who you've met, Scott Becker, and Mackenzie Pudici, who you're going to hear from in just a minute. So, as I mentioned, not only are you going to learn a ton today, but some of you, a bunch of you actually, are going to get some great prizes. We have an amazing lineup, including 3 Kindle Scribes. I love those things. Every time we do one of these events and we're giving away Scribes, I think to myself, I've got to go on Amazon and get one. I haven't done it yet, and I'm not eligible to win on this event, so oh well. But you folks are, and 3 of you are going to get them. We're also going to be giving away a $300 Amazon gift card every 30 minutes. So stick around for those. And with that, folks, what do you say we move on to the main event? And we're going to start this event off with a fantastic keynote discussion between Larry Seltzer, an old friend of mine who is also a security researcher, who will be discussing the fundamentals of defense in depth with the aforementioned Mackenzie Pudici. Mackenzie is standing by with Larry right now, so I'm going to throw this over to him.
Larry, it is great to have you back for today's MegaCast.
It's great to be back.
Right. Good. All right, Larry, let's dive into this. Today, we are exploring the elements of a layered security program. We have everything from firewalls to antivirus, IDS, IPS, EDR, MFA, encryption, DLP, secure coding practices, end user training. So, with all that in mind, how would you suggest one prioritizes the implementation of these security technologies? And what criteria would you use to decide where to invest your resources?
Okay, well, before you can intelligently assess any actual technologies, you need to finish some other tasks. The first is to identify your critical assets and data, the things that you plan to protect. You should attempt to place some value on these assets, and that will help with prioritization. You put higher value on those assets and data that are most sensitive and most valuable to the organization. Second, arguably part of the first one, you need to assess the impact of a breach. What would be the potential consequences of a data breach, including financial loss, reputational damage, regulatory fines, things like that. The data from these two exercises will be a major part of the input into the third task, a risk assessment. So here you can evaluate the likelihood of various threats and their potential impact on the organization. Then you prioritize the risks so that you can focus on mitigating the ones with the highest probability and greatest potential harm. Now we can talk about security technologies and levels of depth. There are baseline security technologies that everyone should have. At the network level, these are the old school things: firewalls, IDS, IPS, VPNs. Cutting edge attacks these days may get through this level, although many will be stopped by proper use of them. And there are still a lot of less sophisticated attacks that these things will block. Partially as an alternative, a lot of people are using SASE. That's a Secure Access Service Edge. It's a service that runs software on your client systems and it proxies and secures all access through the internet. If you have a lot of remote employees, these make a lot of sense. If your employees spend all day in cloud services rather than on your corporate network, they make even more sense, although you can access the corporate network securely through them as well. And you get like you get single sign-on for these things. You still need a VPN and firewalls, but SASE takes care of that and a lot more, and it's run by experts who know what they're doing. Now at the endpoints, you need antivirus, anti-malware software. If you're running an EDR, endpoint detection and response, it may subsume all the functions of traditional anti-malware, and you really need to ask your EDR vendor about that. But you may you may need to run both, probably not. You may want to run some kind of DLP, data loss prevention software at the endpoint. Maybe not. There are other ways to approach that. Once again, this depends on the sensitivity of the data on the endpoint. And you should always be encrypting data when it's stored or on the wire. At the level of identity, which is everywhere in the network, you're almost certainly going to need single sign-on. No excuses, no exceptions. You need multi-factor authentication. The lack of it always comes back to bite you. And I'm a big fan. Once again, I wouldn't call this a must-have, but a really good thing to have is privileged access management, PAM systems to protect, gives special protections for the most sensitive assets and systems. And I'm not quite done yet. There's, depending on your needs, your cloud posture, you may benefit from a CASB, Cloud Access Security Broker, which, by the way, the SASE performs some of this function. And if your cloud exposure is great enough, Cloud Security Posture Management, which is, well, look into it. For threat management, you probably need SIEM, SIM, security and information and event management, and it's good to have. There's other things like that, and there's a whole lot of four-letter acronyms. How do you decide which of these you need and which to buy? Your specific needs will drive a lot of this, but basically evaluate the ROI, access the cost benefit ratio. Well, the look at the cost benefit ratio of each technology using the information you determined at the start of the process, comparing the possible savings from preventing the costs associated with events the technology prevents. The more of all this you have, the more overhead costs you may need for administering, maintaining it all. So you have to figure that into equation too.
So you've done a great job at kind of explaining this buffet of tools that are out there. So how do you ensure that the various security layers are well coordinated and they're not kind of creating gaps or redundancies?
There's a lot you could say about this. I could write a book, and in fact, if there's any publishers out there, please give me a call. It takes a combination of well thought out policy from above and consistent blocking and tackling from below. This is, I'm thinking football this time of year. You need clear and consistent policies. And most of them with centralized management. Sometimes you can distribute management for efficiency. You need to apply updates regularly. That's probably the biggest way that holes develop. You need comprehensive threat modeling to identify vulnerabilities and prioritize risks around those vulnerabilities. This is a good time to mention that you need continuous monitoring and testing of results so that you can adjust policies based on the results. That includes incident response planning, tabletop exercises around them, penetration testing to assess the effectiveness of measures. Teamwork is critical. You need regular communications channels to share information on both operations and security threats. You need cross-functional teams to protect against isolated teams working against each other, which it really happens a lot in big organizations if there aren't good measures in place. And finally, and I can't stress this enough, automation and orchestration. It's effectively impossible to do all the day-to-day work of security without automating operations to the greatest degree possible, and orchestrating systems to ensure consistent use of secure configurations. If you don't have the capability to put all this into effect, you really ought to hire a consultant to help you. It's worth it. I'm a big believer in using outside consultants to bring in a variety of perspectives and you know in industry expertise, especially when it comes to planning and testing, like those tabletop exercises and penetration testing.
Well, I imagine they've seen, you know, a variety of different systems and
Mhm.
setups from different organizations. So they're going to
Yeah.
have all that knowledge coming in with them when they kind of look to assess what you've got under the hood or what you're trying to set up.
Yeah.
Incredible. So then, what role, you touched on this a little bit, but what role does training play in the strategy? How can you ensure that the end users and the IT staff are effectively educated on this?
All right, I'm going to split that into two questions. Specifically the training of IT staff on the systems you're using. It's obviously necessary and will benefit both you and the staff. And you should probably support a certain amount of general continuing education that they might need, for instance, to maintain certifications. This may be more for their benefit, but for yours as well, and makes your place a good business place to work at. Um, and for training non-IT employees, I run hot and cold on this. It's necessary for a variety of reasons, but I'm leery of the effectiveness of it, and I'm not sure there's really good data on how effective it is. Now, ironically, defense in depth may be the bit of a culprit here. If every user failure to spot a phishing attack resulted in a successful attack, we'd be a lot more worried about phishing. How many were blocked by user inaction and how many by deeper levels of security? I don't know. There are many really good systems for designing and executing formal training for employees and periodic tests like phishing emails to see if they follow policy and report or just click the link that they shouldn't click. In theory, if this works, it's a great thing because humans in your organization are the biggest attack surface you have.
All right. So then, I think we've done a good lay of the land here of what's happening, what people should be thinking about. So let's look outward a little bit. What do you see as the future of a layered security approach? Are there evolving threats or trends that will likely reshape what we're talking about today, just around the corner, or kind of within the next months or years that you can talk about?
The only thing I'm really sure of, I guess, is the increase in complexity and volume, and therefore the greater need for automation and orchestration. Now, this is nothing really new. We've talking about a while time. We've also been talking a long time about the role of AI in security. And it absolutely figures in here. If I'm right that this stuff is really complicated and only getting more complicated, then an AI model with a full understanding of your network and your operations could really help with identifying vulnerabilities and actual attacks, and even in designing and implementing automated mitigations.
So then, would that kind of be your big takeaway for today, the automation and orchestration? How do we put like a a big punch on that, a big highlight?
I think everybody who's been paying attention at security knows this already, and it's I think everybody's got plans for it, like beyond the current budget period. There's never enough of it, and you really need to, to the extent that you have um, manual processes for things like renewing uh, digital certificates, you're really setting yourself up for a disaster. So just look at for an opportunity to automate everything. It really pays for itself in the long run.
Right. Excellent. Well, Larry, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure to hear from you once again, pick your brain again, and we're going to head back to today's MegaCast. Thanks so much.
Thank you. It's always great to be here.
And thank you both, Larry and Mackenzie, for that fantastic keynote. And I wanted to throw up our first poll question of the event. What is your time frame for adding updating existing IT solutions at your company? 0 to 6 months, 6 to 12 months, 12 to 24 months, or are you not sure? Let us know right now. Now, I've got to say one thing while you continue to vote here. Larry mentioned football season being here and all that, and I have to admit I'm a big football fan, and I grew up in Washington D.C. and my father was a Washington football fan and used to be a season ticket holder. So I have to say this after the Monday night game. It's nice to see that the Washington football team, the Commanders, now finally have a quarterback. Any of you who are football fans, did you see my boy Jaden Daniels tear up the Bengals on Monday night? It was fantastic. That's not IT related, but after 25 years of wandering in the football wilderness, it's just so nice to see. So anyway, keep voting in the poll, and you don't need to hear any more about my football travails, but I did want to throw that in because it has been a while. And with that, folks, let's get on to more serious matters. It is time for our first presentation in today's MegaCast, and this comes from Veeam. Presenting for Veeam is Javier Perez, Senior, the Director of Product Marketing for Security. Now, he is here with us right now. Javier, it is great to have you kick this off today. I'm going to turn this sucker over to you.
Sounds good. Thank you very much. I would love to talk about football as well, but I don't have a lot of time. So let's get started. My name again is Javier Perez, Senior Director of Product Marketing. Do also evangelism around security, open source security, application security, and representing Veeam, obviously, with data protection and data resilience, all things around security and on my side. So what I have here for you is actually it was a good keynote, a good overview of all things related to security, especially in the context of an enterprise, right? All the different tooling and the different products and the different areas that have to cover security. I'm actually going to talk about two extra ones, two that were not mentioned even with that comprehensive overview. One is about data protection, and the other one is about incident response. So what we offer at Veeam, for people not familiar with, it's about data protection. We call it data resilience, and it's one of the leaders, or number one global market leader in what we call data resilience, which is beyond just the protection, but also be able to recover and move forward rapidly, when you need it, right? So really, it's about powering that resilience with data backups, data recovery. We call it data freedom, which is the portability of your data. Of course, data security, and that's what I'm going to be talking to you more in the next few minutes, and data intelligence, right? Applying those that AI that we have now, and adding, being having all that information available for you, taking advantage of AI tooling for you. So very large organization. If you haven't heard about Veeam software, we actually global organization, over 5,000 employees, over this surprised me when I joined, over 550,000 customers, right? Everywhere from the small enterprise to the small organization to a very large enterprise. So what to start here to talking about the Veeam cybersecure and offering there, it's information that we have from industry reports. So every year we run a survey, a big survey, over 1,200 respondents, and we call it the last one. We call it a 2024 ransomware trends report. We are actually starting to work on next year's survey and then report. But one big highlight here is, and you will see in other reports similar stats, where 75%, yes, 75% of organizations suffer at least one ransomware attack last year, right? And many of them more than once. This is real, right? Obviously, it's not in the news every day, right? Only the big ones, or it's only a few, make the news, but they are ransomware attacks every day, and we have a team for incident response that are actually working on a daily basis on cases. We literally get cases every day, big numbers, hundreds, sometimes hundreds in a month, hundreds in a quarter, and thousands for a year. Here's some more statistics. Don't want to scare you too much, but let me highlight, when we talk about data protection, the fact that when there's a ransomware attack, right, it's about encrypting your data, but the threat actors know that you're going to recover quickly, right? If you have a backup, you're going to be able to recover. So what do? Well, they do attack. They target backup repositories as well, and that's as high as 90% based on our survey, right? So you have to have your backups. You have to be ready. You have to protect that. Another important number there is the financial impact. It's far beyond just the ransom payment. If the organization is willing to pay, obviously that's not something that we recommend, but every case is different. Even if organizations pay a ransom, that's just part, and that's that 32% of the cost, right? The fact that you cannot access data or systems, cloud workloads, the whole operation could represent, halting your sales, or the whole operation, right? Your whole activity. So not to mention reputation and in some cases even lawsuits by some of the customers. So the cost is much higher than what we see in terms of the ransom payment. Now, the other factor there is, obviously, even if you pay, not necessarily that means that you're going to recover your data, right? Sometimes there's a really bad tooling there, or errors or mistakes during the encryption, so make it really hard to do the decryption. And that's what we see every day in cases with customers. When I say every day, it's on the incident response side of the business. So very interesting numbers, alarming for some, but yes, the ransomware it's happening. So how do you prepare for that? We talked about Veeam, it's mentioned on different frameworks and different recommendations, different guidelines. CISA and other government-based organizations and all over the world, they talk about your plans, your protection, obviously your testing. On the keynote, we heard a little bit about training as well, right? Having basic training from not falling into phishing attacks and things like that. Obviously, you have to have a world-class technical support, someone to back you up or help you when you need it. And then the last piece there is the expert ransomware incident response. And I'll talk to you more about that. That's a very, very important piece. And with the numbers that I just presented, it's, you say, well, look, let's do everything you can on your defenses, but if it happens, let's be ready with that backing. Just really quick, in terms of data protection, data platforms that help you with ransomware prevention, meaning you have your clean backups, you have your immutable backups, and then certain functionality security related functionality when you are doing your backups, right? So from malware detection to health checks to policies via JARA rules, or integrations with other cybersecurity tooling, right? For example, SIEM integrations, where if there's an incident, there's an issue detected, can be sent via an API to your data platform, and then recognize when there was detected, for example, malware, and then be able to recover or do the recovery just before that malware was present, right? So the more, that was also mentioned on the keynote, automation, the better, and be able to be proactive and detecting in real time potential, for example, malware or other threats. Obviously, you want a good, clean recovery. You want to make sure that you test your backups, that you test your recovery, that you have well tested plans to do that. And then if it happens, as I mentioned, what happens when it happens? Well, have an incident response plan. And that's part of the offering from Veeam through recent acquisition of Cofware, what we call it now Cofware by Veeam. So this is the cyber secure. So beyond just you have your data, you have your data protection, your backups on Veeam or any other platform, what we are offering here is the services above that, right? So the services, really kind of what we call a white glove service by Veeam, offered to Veeam Data Platform customers. And the idea here, what you see there with the colors, is to be secure or get secure, stay secure, and achieve the best outcome, right? Really during the incident and after the incident. So ransomware attack, before it happens, there's multiple ways to prevent that, right? And be ready with your defenses and readiness and preparation. One is your platforms. I would recommend always to have a proper architectural review, a proper design of how's all your data protection environment. When I say data protection, I mean what's going to be backup when, at what time, the technology, the workloads, and all that. If you need help with the implementation services, with that, we offer that. Of course, obviously, technical support, assigned a support manager, and having proper onboarding on platforms. And then a key piece here is staying up to date, having some personalized or some scheduled sessions to keep learning about ransomware. There are so many different topics around ransomware at all levels, from the people in the front lines, technical focus, to even executives and even board members, when they have to learn about things like payments for ransomware and policies or compliance regulations. Some countries you cannot pay, from some countries, right? But there are restrictions, things like that. So important part of that pre-incident. Then comes the during the attack, and Cofware, we offer expert incident response. The first thing, really quick, is to when a customer calls, the customer is in the middle of attack, can access some of the systems, some of the data, receives typically a ransom note, and that's when approach us. And the first thing we do is go on and do the assessment, and we have the tooling to do the assessment for that. I'll talk to you in just a second about more of that information that we gather on that assessment phase. Then, of course, is the negotiation. Important negotiation with the threat actors. Important mention here is that negotiation doesn't mean that you're paying. It means that you are interacting, you're getting information, you're getting proof of the encryption, proof of the exfiltration, for example, right? If decide to pay the ransom, then also assistance with the settlement. Typically, it's done now with via cryptocurrency and mainly Bitcoin, and then of course help with the decryption, right? Paying or not paying, there's the effort there to do reverse engineering on the encrypted data and find ways to decrypt that information. So let me tell you a little bit more about that. I think that's important. The technology to do the assessment is go and run a scan on the affected systems, on the areas that are considered affected, and then collect information, right? Collect ransomware information around what was encrypted, which way was encrypted, what type of encryption, and based on that, and basically a database of cases of we document every single case, so a database of cases that help us as a reference. We can plan a strategy or what's going to be negotiated, what's not. Sometimes the threat actors just rename files. They look like encrypted, but they're just renamed. That's just one simple example. Other cases, we're starting to see some of indicators of compromise. We see some of the encryption. In some cases, actually, even the encryption is still going on, right? So for the containment, just disconnecting and taking things offline, that could affect the encryption, right? And once you break an encryption, then the recovery of the decryption it makes it much harder, or sometimes it's impossible to decrypt. So making sure that you have all that information, that's the first piece of the assessment. And then the second part is having that reference, as I mentioned, based on documented cases, which now we're talking about thousands over the last 6 years that cohort has been around. And then get that information about even what's the threat actor, who's the threat actor, what's the group or an affiliate, what's the experience with that specific threat actor. I have an example here on the slide about Black Hat, which, by the way, was disbanded. There were a few FBI arrests on that, and we're seeing them popping up some of the similar technologies now, right? But having that information about the default, like if they're exfiltrating as well, right? So they sometimes do the double extortion, which is encryption and also exfiltrating, stealing some of the data. And the extortion is if you don't pay for the ransom, not only you not only get the keys to decrypt, but also your data is going to be made public, and you might have some private information, customer data, things like that, right? So it makes it really hard, and it's good to have that reference of that expertise of different cases that, and sometimes like the same threat actors going multiple places. We know how they are behaving, what decisions can be made. And then obviously with all that information, we can provide information about like the latest threat actors. And this is from Q2. We are about to close Q3, so we'll have new information. Now, this data is already outdated, right? These threat actors keep changing. The actual malicious tooling, the hacker tools keep changing. So this slide is actually already outdated, right? But that expertise is the important part when you're in the middle of the attack and gain some expert help. Finally, the third piece, you see that in many other offerings, is a ransomware recovery warranty based on a criteria, be able to pay up to $5 million on a warranty, and all the information properly documented for cyber insurance, right? Many companies now with insurance, they need validation before and after the attack, and have all that documentation ready. That's something that we have a lot of experience with. So just to finalize here, I think I'm over my time. This is really quick, kind of in a nutshell, the Veeam Cybersecure offering with services, professional services and support, quarterly reviews as well, security assessments, very important. I forgot to mention that earlier. So professional services as a pre-incident. During the incident, have that expert incident response expertise, especially in ransomware with 24/7 coverage, 15-minute SLAs, and so on. Having the technology to do the assessment, as I mentioned earlier, having the technology to also assist with the encryption, and finally document that, and even also have the option for a recovery warranty. So with that, I might not have time for questions, but let me know.
Hi, Javier. You certainly do have time for questions. Great presentation. I really love that. Fantastic information. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to throw up our next poll while we get these questions prepped here. Please let us know what additional information you would like from Veeam. I also want to remind everyone about the handouts. We have got a PDF from Veeam that Javier mentioned. It's their ransomware trends report. Now, this is something everybody in the industry looks forward to getting, and you can get it right now for free. So make sure you download that while we go through the questions. So with that, Javier, let's dive in and see what we've got here. Interesting question based on, it looks like some of you about your report. How good / accurate is national cyber attack reporting? That's really interesting because I'm not sure how the numbers are gathered and presented and all of that. Do you find it to be pretty accurate?
Well, so the first thing is not everyone reports a cyber attack. There, in certain industries, there's obviously a mandate, right? That if you're a public company, you have to disclose that, for example. And in some countries, they're starting to add legislation for reporting. So that's the first point, right? When you run reports or like this, the ransomware trends report, it's based on surveys, right? So yes, you get some information. You have some more idea of how many people got attacked, how many people paid the ransom, things like that. That's my answer, right? Like right. You have some level of confidence on the numbers, but the fact that it's not everyone will disclose.
Sure. Okay. Next question comes from Nick, and this is a kind of a C-level question that I'm sure, hear a lot at Veeam. And how do you get organizations to invest enough in cybersecurity before it's too late? What do you say to those people who wonder if they can afford it?
Yeah. So the phrase that I used when I'm in front of a customer doing a presentation is like, nobody wants to be on the news, right? And everyone gets the reaction, yes, we do not want to be on the news as the next organization that got breached or had a ransomware attack or cyber attack. It's hard, yes, I've been there, right? Starting with even IT budgets and of course, security budgets. What we can do with events like this, and been mentioned earlier that I'm to kind of advocate and evangelist, it's awareness, right? The more people are familiar with or understand cybersecurity, I think the more recognition around investing on it, like budgets on it. There's the government side of things that also kind of mandates, also kind of force or regulation, kind of force to have budgets, for example, to meet compliance, right? So there are different ways to attack that. Not an easy, an easy way to do it, but yeah, definitely ways to do it.
I think another way you can always put it, and you alluded to this a little bit, was what is it going to cost you to get attacked? How do you stack that up against what you're going to pay to get protected? And I think when you put it in those terms, it's a really simple calculation, isn't it?
Actually, well said. Yeah, and I forgot to mention, right? Like the trade actors, they know your revenues, They go and do their homework, research companies, and that's how they place their ransom. That's how they charge. So yes, that's a good way to put like the cost of disruption, outage.
Yeah, exactly. And it's, in fact, it's not unusual for a company to have to pay multiple ransoms because, if their backups are corrupted, the ransom can spread to the next group. And I mean, it can just be an ongoing thing. So the consequences are so much worse than any kind of upfront payment I think you would make. So to me, that almost feels like a no-brainer if you can find lots of examples out there of what companies have suffered due to ransomware attacks. But with that, Javier, I wanted to ask you one final question. There's a bunch of questions we couldn't get to because you've really intrigued people here. But I want to ask you, for someone who wants to take the next step with Veeam right after this event today, what do you recommend they do?
Yeah, come to veeam.com, veam.com, and we can get in touch. It's all about what I mentioned earlier: data resilience, Veeam cybersecurity, which includes this incident response offering. There's a lot of details. I mentioned also, the fact that we have like constant education, training around ransomware topics. There's so many areas there. I mean, we can definitely talk for hours and hours on the topic.
For sure. All right. Once again, Javier, thank you so much for being on with us today. Thank you for the great information and the Q&A insights.
My pleasure. Bye.
Bye now. Okay, everyone. So you have another few seconds to vote in the poll while I give away the first $300 Amazon gift card of the day. Remember, we're giving away gift cards every half hour, along with the Kindle Scribes, which we're giving away 3 of. And the winner of the first $300 Amazon card of the day is Josh Glasser from Pennsylvania. Congratulations to you, Josh. We will be in touch about claiming your prize. So now it is time for the next presentation in the MegaCast, and this one comes from Okta. And presenting for Okta is Ayla Sharg, the Director of Solutions Product Marketing. Ayla is ready to go, so I am going to turn it over. You have got the mic.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining today's webinar. I'll be giving an overview of some of the key findings from our 2023 State of Zero Trust report, and we'll also be discussing how some of the same principles of continuously monitoring your systems in Zero Trust should also be applied to identity. So as always, please submit any questions that you have in the chat, and the team will be monitoring and answering throughout my presentation. We'll also try to save some time at the end for some questions. Now, jumping into the report findings. So this is our 5th annual report where we surveyed over 800 security and IT professionals globally on the state of Zero Trust deployments as of 2023. And some of the biggest takeaways we saw was that Zero Trust has shifted from a thought leadership goal to something that's become a key part of an organization's security strategy. The majority of the organizations surveyed had already deployed a Zero Trust initiative. And for those that hadn't, there was a defined plan in place for them to achieve it in the next 18 months or shorter. And while many organizations are cutting budgets, Zero Trust initiatives are seemingly able to withstand those macroeconomic pressures that many of our different parts of our organizations are facing. And this can be because while everyone is forced to have to do more with less these days, the ongoing threat of cyber attacks are still on the rise. And so organizations are staying focused on hardening their defenses through identity-based security initiatives. And this is something that we at Okta love to see. The report showed that identity is now widely understood as imperative to a Zero Trust strategy. And in today's world, identity is the new perimeter, and it's something that we've been saying for years. And strong identity management is a fundamental element for an organization's success to operate and scale securely and confidently. Now, with all of that in mind, organizations are still challenged when it comes to adopting Zero Trust. designing, scheduling, and implementing a zero trust strategy is complicated at best and involves many stakeholders, and every strategy is bespoke for each organization. And this is further complicated when you layer on the challenge of adhering to privacy regulations, addressing gaps in technology and people, and then, of course, cost concerns. Now, let's dive into that first key takeaway. The trend of zero trust moving away from thought leadership buzzword to fundamental security strategy. And that's reinforced by a few points in the report. So we saw a pretty large jump from a global perspective relating to organizations with a zero trust initiative in place. Back in 2021, just 24% of organizations had an initiative in place. But as of 2023, that number is at a solid 61%. And of that 61%, it seems like the sweet spot for organization size are those with 5,000 to 10,000 employees, where 3 out of 4 reported having a defined initiative in place. And the good news is that smaller organizations are really not that far behind. So organizations with 500 to 1,000 employees reported 49%, and organizations with 1,000 to 5,000 employees at 64%. And when it comes to where that adoption is happening, North America continues to lead in terms of initiatives already in place, but EMEA and APJ are gaining ground. Nearly all of the holdouts in both of those regions plan to adopt an initiative within the next 6 to 18 months. And the importance of identity is becoming increasingly more apparent for those leading these zero trust initiatives. In last year's survey, only 27% of global respondents said that identity was extremely important to their overall zero trust security strategy. But this year, that number's increased to 51%. And similar to overall zero trust adoption, EMEA and APJ regions may still be breaking through some perceptual barriers, with just 7 and 8% of respondents respectively declaring identity neither important nor unimportant. And further validating that identity is becoming a more important player in the world of security and zero trust, in North America, the number of security teams that own identity access management is at 73%. EMEA is at 50%, and we're seeing a more dispersed spread in the APJ region. But with increasingly complex workforces, including full-time employees, contractors, partners, and vendors, all of who need reliable access at any time from various locations, organizations worldwide are making great strides towards establishing strong, identity-backed zero trust security postures. And as a result, we're seeing organizations prioritizing MFA for external users, with 34% of this year's respondents having such security measures in place, and MFA for employees at a surprising 1% lower at 33%. And for those adopting more advanced identity security practices, context-based access policies and automated provisioning are less likely to have been implemented, but are already in place at 1 in 5 organizations. Now, back in 2021, companies were more concerned with setting up external users with SSO and MFA and tightening access policies. Now that most organizations have adopted these tools, that focus has shifted. So the highest priorities globally include implementing MFA for employees, securing access to APIs, and managing privileged access to critical resources. And only a small minority, and I'm speaking about less than 20%, said that these security initiatives were a low priority for them. So what's next for organizations around zero trust? Organizations around the world still have a ways to go, citing cost concerns, technology gaps, privacy regulations, and data security. And those are most often listed as the top challenges to enacting a zero trust security initiative. And cost is a recurring theme year over year, but the rise of privacy regulations is actually new this year. And concerns around stakeholder buy-in has actually diminished from previous years. And this is likely due to having more security experts, security organizations, and government agencies all validating zero trust principles. Now, let's continue on that thought of looking forward. And to do this, we need to continue to evolve the way in which we're thinking about identity. Zero trust is a framework that requires visibility and control across your entire security and technology stack. If you're familiar with John Kindervag's 5 steps to establishing zero trust or the CISA zero trust maturity model, there's always a major element focused on continuously monitoring your ecosystem. And that's to detect anomalies and threats, but also to make adjustments as the business evolves and changes. Those same principles apply to securing identity. It's a process, not a singular event. For a long time, logging in with a username and password was a way to establish trust between the application and the user. But in today's threat landscape, that trust formally established is frequently and consistently abused. Stolen credentials have become the norm, and some attack techniques don't even require the use of passwords anymore. Instead, attackers are launching automated attacks that bombard your environment, hoping that either a lucky guess or a frustrated user will give them the foot in the door that they're looking for. But there's been a number of identity-related breaches that have taken place after a user has been authenticated. And attackers are using several methods to steal a valid token and hijack the session, such as a cross-site script attack, installing malware, adversary in the middle attacks, session sniffing, and many, many more. And many high-profile breaches have used stolen cookies to impersonate a user and steal data, including British Airways. And according to the Verizon 2023 DBIR report, this type of attack is extremely successful and continues to succeed. Identifying suspicious activity before authentication and monitoring and verifying user activity after the login are just as important as the initial authentication. And it's also the best way to maintain a secure environment. In the pre-authentication stage, the goal here is to make it as difficult as possible for bad actors to get in, while simultaneously making it as simple and secure as possible for legitimate users to get in. At this stage of authentication, attackers commonly use brute force techniques, leveraging bots and automation to hit as many user accounts as possible, including brute force techniques like credential stuffing, where they're leveraging credentials compromised from other systems to compromise a new one with the knowledge that many users reuse credentials. Or they're using password spray, where a real username and commonly used passwords are attempted. Think password 1234, all of which is done in hopes of finding a match. And it's important to note that these failed login attempts can also prevent a legitimate user from getting in, which causes a loss in productivity because the users are forced to wait for an account reset. And best practices here include addressing brute force attacks. So they're often using known malicious IPs or using the same IPs to log into many accounts over and over. But with identifiable patterns like this, you can reduce the manual effort while proactively preventing automated attacks by automatically blocking those known malicious IP addresses. And with a lot of that noise cut down, your team has the cycles and capacity to focus on the unknown. And to do this, you should log suspicious events for follow-up. And with this data, you can more easily identify unusual user behavior that signals an attack. So things like logins from a country the user is not known to have traveled to, or logging in from a new and unknown device, or if they were originally logged in from a location, let's say somewhere in Wisconsin, but is now logging in about 20 minutes later from a location overseas. And it's in these cases where requiring additional authentication factors can help improve identity security without having to lock valid users out of their accounts. And this is best done with what's called user behavior context. And the nice thing is, it's not just improving your security posture, but if you were to present streamlined login experiences when a user is logging in at the same time, from the same location and secured device, using this pattern behavior, you can actually reduce the login friction and improve productivity. Now, MFA has been a leading tool to stop credential theft, stopping automated brute force attacks and social engineering attacks directly at that point of authentication, at stage 2. But as MFA adoption has grown, adversaries have gotten smarter and have begun using more sophisticated attacks to bypass or steal authentication tokens. And this includes adversary in the middle attacks, where users are tricked into putting their credentials into a convincing but fake page, where an attacker will then capture that second factor, or push notification abuse, where a user is flooded with valid push notification alerts triggered by an attacker and eventually validates the prompt with a yes, it's me, out of frustration or overwhelmed or confusion. And in order to prevent attacks like these, you want to deploy phishing-resistant MFA that prevents attackers from getting around these second-factor authentication tokens. So this means ensuring users only connect to valid domains, including ones created by attackers to capture their second factor, responding only to valid requests from known and trusted parties, eliminating shared secrets like passwords or security questions. And again, speaking more specifically to phishing-resistant MFA, this means leveraging factors like hardware keys or biometrics. So things that only the valid user might have physically on them or might be themselves as individuals, all of which is done in order to validate that they are who they say they are. And because attacks don't just start or stop after a user's been authenticated, identity verification also shouldn't start and stop at authentication. It's becoming more common for attackers to hijack a legitimate session after a user is authenticated. And I gave you a couple of examples earlier. As an example, malware can collect session cookies on the device, where an attacker can then use those to log in and move laterally. So to mitigate session cookie theft, you should only allow short sessions, have users re-authenticate frequently, and implement policies that require users to re-authenticate their session whenever a user closes or opens the browser, or maybe when they're attempting to access a sensitive resource. But these can negatively impact the user experience and can leave opportunities for an attacker to be successful, especially when users try to mitigate these prevention mechanisms. So best practices for securing sessions post-login that are not going to add additional friction for your users are sharing data across your security stack, such as from your EDR or MDM tools, with your identity solution to detect potential threats sooner, continuously monitoring your sessions for suspicious behavior, so things like multiple password resets, new IP addresses, or attempts to access new applications or data, using automation to make immediate action depending on the anomaly, so things like requiring re-authentication or terminating a session, and analyzing data to uncover patterns and anomalous activity. Now, here's a quick recap of everything we just talked about. So when we're looking at that pre-authentication and authentication stages, there's a lot of information that you can use to evaluate risk before and as a user logs in. And we tried to visualize that a little bit here to show that these actions can and should continue past the point of authentication. So before a user logs in, using information available like their IP address and device as part of your authentication policy can reduce the risk of bots breaching defenses. And if you're collecting and analyzing user behavior or sharing risk signals with your MDM or EDR XDR software, you can reduce that risk even further while simultaneously reducing login friction for valid users. So a couple of examples, if I'm logging in at the same time every day from the same IP address and device, and my EDR software doesn't detect any malware, or my MDM reports that the device has a lock screen, I can then be directed towards a more streamlined login experience. However, if I'm attempting to log in the middle of the night, 1,000 miles away on an unfamiliar device or any one of these things, you can have a policy in place that has me jump through extra authentication hoops, or maybe even limits my access when I do authenticate. And at the authentication stage is where the phishing resistant MFA comes in. So preventing attackers from bypassing traditional MFA. And at this post-authentication stage, don't stop looking at the user, their device, their behavior, or their session. Here, you should still be looking for things like, has the XDR software suddenly detected malware on the device and maybe indicated an elevated risk level? Is the IP address used in the session the same as the one the session started with? If not, that can potentially be a signal of a session takeover, or maybe the user just moved locations. But how can you tell? And that's when these other signals come in, like user behavior or device information, as well as analytics that identify patterns and anomalous activities. Gathering this sort of information not only feeds into the identity analytics, but allows you to continuously adapt to how trusted that particular session might be. And this evaluation happens in the context of that active user session. So here at Okta, we're calling this continued risk evaluation, where we're merging identity signals with external threat data and employing machine learning to more accurately assess risk. And in the context of identity, analytics can help find and mitigate threats more quickly. And the more data it can crunch, the better the analytics will be at detecting abnormal user activities, dormant accounts that should be deprovisioned, misconfigurations, or even detecting users that may have a higher risk of being a threat vector. And once you've assessed that risk, and this should happen at any one of these stages, it's important to take action to address threats while minimizing inconvenience for users. Ideally, elevated risk levels and policies automatically trigger actions, enforcing both authentication-related actions or any other action. So for example, pre-authentication, if your MDM or XDR detects malware on the user device, you can deny their authentication, or you can kick off a workflow that alerts your device security team that a user has malware so they can take the steps necessary to remediate it. And at the authentication stage, like we mentioned before, this could involve adding or subtracting factors for users depending on their risk level. And at the post-authentication stage, you could be looking for changes outside of the norm, such as an admin on a device without a passcode, accessing applications that they normally don't usually access, and you can then immediately log them out. So that about wraps up my slides here, but I do think we have some time for questions. See a couple in the chat. So first question here, how do these best practices for zero trust and identity align to the CISA zero trust security model? So that's a great question. CISA put out some guidance last year on transitioning to zero trust, but while this guidance is designed for federal agencies or industry partners of those federal agencies, it's really a model that can be applied to any organization. Under the CISA model, identity is one of the top 5 pillars of zero trust. And following that, CISA put together a maturity model with an overview of what each pillar could look like at each stage of their maturity model. Their maturity model has 4 different stages. So traditional is the first, then you have initial, advanced, and optimal. And based on the results of our zero trust report, it looks like customers are mostly in the initial stage with some forays into, advanced while mainly still in traditional. While some are still in traditional, but we're seeing the bulk of our respondents fall within that initial stage. We talked earlier about, I believe it was 33% had implemented MFA for employees and 34% for external users. And this is what leads me to think that most of the respondents fall within that initial stage. Another data point that I didn't bring up earlier is that 28% of our respondents had phishing-resistant MFA for their employees and external users, both of which are fundamental to that advanced stage. And that leaves about, I'm guessing around like 39, 40% who yet to implement MFA or phishing-resistant MFA, placing those organizations in that traditional stage. We also saw about 21% with automated deprovisioning, which is a key component of that initial stage of that system maturity model. And 21% also had merged and synchronized user directories, which is an element of that advanced stage. I would say that identity best practices that we discussed so far today primarily fall within that optimal stage or that most mature stage in that system model. And that's largely because, again, we're talking about the ideal state here. But if you want to know more about the identity pillar of the CISO Zero Trust Maturity Model, we actually have a white paper on it called very directly Zero Trust Understanding the Identity Maturity Model. And we'll put a link in the chat for you all so you can take a look. But hopefully that was helpful in answering that question. I think we have time for one more question here, but let's see. So we're in the early stages of our Zero Trust journey, and it can be hard to get agreement on where the investments should be happening. Any guidance on how to prioritize? So the good news is you're not alone. Most organizations, like I said earlier, are in that Zero Trust planning and adoption phases, and some have moved a little bit further, but we still see a good majority of them in that initial phases. Of course, we're an identity company, so it's no surprise that I'm going to say that you should invest in identity, but Gartner, Verizon, and other established organizations and analysts agree that identity-related attacks are increasing, and that identity is positioned to play an outsized role in security moving forward. Our Zero Trust survey showed that those top identity priorities for organizations are MFA, privileged access management for cloud infrastructure, and securing access to APIs. But when you're looking at your Zero Trust strategy, it helps to consider how investments will help you achieve other business priorities outside of just ones relating to security. So what goals does your organization have regarding, driving revenue, reducing costs through efficiency and agility, or improving your security posture? And at Okta, we actually help organizations who are focused on leveraging identity to drive revenue. This can be done with things like increasing sign-up or conversions, creating seamless omni-channel experiences, or simplifying onboarding of business and enterprise customers with our offerings such as social login, passwordless experiences, account linking, universal login, database and enterprise connections, and actions. And we also help reduce costs through efficiency and agility for use cases like automating employee lifecycle, making it easier to adhere to those pesky governance and compliance standards, and simplifying M&A integrations. And we do that with our offerings like IGA, PAM, workflows, lifecycle management, and highly regulated identity. And of course, we help organizations improve their security posture with use cases like proactively mitigating and remediating identity threats, stopping phishing attacks, and fraud prevention with our offerings like device access, identity threat protection, adaptive MFA and SSO, FastPass, attack protection, and credential guard.
Okay. Thank you so much, Isla. I have to agree with attendee Bobby, who said this is very informative. In 100% agreement, got some great feedback from everyone on that presentation. And I have the Okta poll question up right now. Let us know what information you'd like to see from them. I also want to remind everyone about the handouts. We've got a white paper from Okta about unifying identity. So be sure to check that out while you have a minute. And I'm going to leave that up while I give away the next couple of prizes, including the first grand prize we have today. So first things first, the winner of the $300 Amazon gift card, as I said, we're giving them away every 30 minutes, is Louis Lozano from Virginia. And the winner of the first grand prize, one of those beautiful Kindle scribes, is Jocelyn Blakey Hill from my home state of Maryland. Way to go, Jocelyn. Congratulations to you both. And with that, folks, we are going to move right along here because we have got a presentation ready to go from Duo Security. And presenting for Duo Security today is Ted Keitzman, the Product Marketing Manager. It is always great to have Duo with us. Ted, it's great to see you here today. Welcome to the MegaCast, sir. You have the mic.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that. And thank you to everyone attending. I'm really happy to be here. Let's get into it. So let's see if I don't run into any tech issues right away. Can people see the Achieving Defense in Depth for Identity on my screen? I'm hoping that's a yes. And
we can definitely see it. Definitely.
Perfect. I appreciate the interaction and the validation. Great. So I know for those of you who are on the call right now, I'm coming up right after another folks who are really interested in identity as a part of your security controls. Duo, for those unfamiliar, is also, we're traditionally a multi-factor authentication provider, if you haven't heard of us, and we do a variety of other things as well. Today, I do want to talk about some similar themes, but also walk us down some interesting routes here when it comes to identity security and what we can do with identity. So hopefully in the 20 minutes I have or so, you'll learn a thing or two. So first things first, Cisco Duo is now a part of Cisco. We were acquired a few years back, and so we now have access to a lot of data that comes with Cisco. One of our biggest partners in the security space is Cisco has the Talos incident response team. They also have the Talos research team. And this stat comes, I think we all kind of know this if you're working in IT or security, that 80% of the breaches that they were called for to deal with in 2023 to 2024, 80% of them involved identity as a key component, which is a lot. It's sometimes used as a way to gain initial access. It's sometimes used as a way to pivot within folks' infrastructure or ecosystem. But it's, as you can see, in the majority of cases, there when people are getting breached. Why do we think this is the case? Why is it such a majority of cases are leveraging identity? Well, there's been a rapid increase, and this data is from the Verizon data breach report. There's been an increase in methods of compromising identity that are more advanced or more sophisticated. So if we think about traditional ways to get, phishing, is one way that we can think about of, getting compromising credentials. Just, password spraying, like I just do the most common passwords and I shoot them at your workers' accounts and hope that I get lucky. There are new types of mechanisms that attackers are using to compromise identity. One of them is pretexting, as the name implies. This is providing a pretext for that phishing. So this is, I'm Larry in accounting, doing a little research around your LinkedIn and saying, I'm Larry, or I'm your CEO. I need something important now. Adding that urgency in. That's a much more effective way of compromising credentials. It's not just a blanket spam. It's adding some context in. And in the Verizon data breach report, they've seen that over the last 5 years, this type of mechanism has increased dramatically. We think about another one. This is from the Microsoft's Digital Defense Report. This is AITM being involved in, or the number of domains involved with AITM. That acronym means adversary in the middle. And this means that somebody is taking the time to set up a login page that looks just like, the login to Outlook, the login to Salesforce, the login to any app. It's a skin, but they're actually in the middle. They snag your username, they snag your password, they snag your session token potentially, and then they're good to run on the other side. And the number of domains associated with this type of activity of making that skin and collecting those credentials quadrupled over the last year, basically. So we're seeing these more sophisticated or nuanced versions of compromising identity increase dramatically over time. So maybe this is not the most accurate meme, but basically for attackers, the mechanisms they can use to compromise identity, to use it as a way to get in the door, the prospects are looking up and up these days. They have a variety of new techniques that are more sophisticated. Probably people maybe haven't been trained on them to compromise credentials beyond just the classics of phishing or password spray, etc. So why do these techniques work in the first place? I think I have, throughout the rest of this presentation, a variety of sort of illustrations. They're homemade. I hope you don't judge them too much, but basically, if there's at the point of authentication, a user shows up, they present their credentials. So this can be a username and then their password, which is something they know, and then they get access. The hard part about stopping this type of attack is it's really easy, on the internet for an attacker to present valid credentials. They can show up at the same door and do username, password, present the credentials, and get let right in. So how do we deal with the fact that they're doing that they're they're grabbing those credentials from adversary in the middle, they're using pretexting? Where do we go from here? If they're getting better at those mechanisms to get through that checkpoint of authentication, well, traditionally we have focused here. I think everyone in the industry is on this authentication component, and we've added on things like multi-factor authentication. Duo does that a lot, or is a big player in the multi-factor space. But our opinion now is that we need to expand beyond this and look both pre and post authentication to achieve more defense in depth. We need to expand beyond just the authentication checkpoint to pre-authentication and post-authentication as well. So there are three concrete ways we think about trying to improve identity security. And I'll go over each of them in the next few minutes here. But one is pre-authentication, gaining identity visibility and doing some posture management. At the authentication gate itself, improving auth methods and access policy. And then after post-authentication, implementing identity threat detection and response. So we think about gaining identity visibility and posture management. What does that really mean? Well, from our perspective, one of the challenges around identity today is that it used to be just that you had sort of on-premise Active Directory accounted for most identity around, but now people are transitioning to cloud identity providers, whether that be Microsoft Entra, Okta. They're using Google. If you might be a startup or a smaller company, often they'll use Google as their main directory. There are other data sources that you want to have identity or that are relevant to identity, things like Workday or HR systems, cloud directories that are associated with cloud infrastructure like AWS or Azure, and then developer credentials like in GitHub. The challenge for identity security is that we often don't have good visibility across all of these systems. At any given one of them might have a dashboard that shows you the things that you need to know. But what we need to be doing is building out an identity graph that comes complete, or that is both cross-platform and distilling identity across all of those platforms. And so this is something that people can build in-house. In fact, I was at RSA this year, and our team did a workshop on how you can build identity graphs. If you would like to do it, sort of bootstrap it in your own environment, what the tools that you need, how to start distilling identity. It is also a service that folks can provide. So at Duo, we have a tool called Identity Intelligence that builds this identity graph for you. And it basically takes the identity information from all of your different identity sources and then distills them down to my name's Ted, my my identity within the company I work for has a bunch of different components. I have different accounts associated with me, but it's making it so there's just one Ted and it can track the things that I do or, the access that I make and the applications I go to on a day-to-day basis. What's really nice about building an identity graph is you get insight into a variety of different identity and access relevant metrics. One of them being who's using MFA, who's not using MFA, what types of MFA are in use. So this is a really popular report that pops out of our dashboard, which is, which users have no MFA configured. Did we expect that? Do we want them to have MFA? Who has strong MFA configured? Who's still using SMS? What types of MFA are being used in the environment? This can be really nice if you're wanting to improve your posture overall, to have a nice mechanism to track all of these pieces. Another one is thinking about administrator accounts and activity. So if you've been keeping track of the identity-based breaches that have been happening, one of the key types of accounts that people target is obviously identity administrators. Making an identity if you can target an identity administrator, you can change the access policy to the whole organization. You can say, we no longer require MFA. We no longer require you to come from a certain location. And when you do that, or if an identity administrator does that, that's very bad news for an organization. So if you have an identity graph, you're able to say, okay, who are the identity administrators? What are they doing over time? Are they doing anything anomalous that we don't expect? So being able to monitor that. And then there are other types of posture insights, like things like a user is in the IDP but not in the HR system. So there's a discrepancy here. Why are they? And that's often a lifecycle management piece. Is this a dormant account, or is it an account that is a childless account where somebody who left the company, but there's still an account floating around that still has permissions. Things like weak MFA, or an unused application for a user. These are all things that pop out of having an identity graph, is being able to assess posture of how things, what types of things you expect in your environment, what things you can improve in your environment, and so forth. So that's pre-authentication, is being able to do some of this posture evaluation. So let's think about at authentication now. So at the actual auth point, I think ways in which we can provide more defense here is improving auth methods and improving access policy. So one challenge we see in our customer base is that they often have gaps in their protection when it comes for authentication requirements. The way that this graph is meant to be read is basically that there are a variety of authentication scenarios in your environment. Some is like when somebody's accessing a SaaS application, somebody's accessing things from a remote access solution. They're doing an offline use case, or there's a contractor or a vendor. In all of these different authentication scenarios, most people have authentication set up something like this, where in some cases they have the highest forms of authentication, like phishing resistant MFA, in place, the most secure. In other cases, they have more traditional forms of MFA that might be push-based, SMS-based, phone callback. And in some cases, they also have no MFA, or there are gaps where they haven't set up MFA, maybe because it's technically difficult. There's a high turnover with contractors, so it's hard to get them to perform MFA. So attackers tend to target in those areas where there aren't MFA, or with those more advanced techniques like adversary in the middle, they actually target things like MFA now as well. So what are some ways we can improve authentication? Well, one is implement phishing resistant MFA wherever possible. And two is implement at least traditional MFA everywhere else. So when we think about phishing resistant MFA, our threat research team at Duo, which we still have in-house, found that WebAuthn, which is a form of passwordless authentication, is a full mitigation for AITM attacks. This is largely achieved because of WebAuthn has an origin binding property. Basically, it can tell it's not fooled by the switch in domain. So when you put up that skin or that URL, WebAuthn won't work there because it knows that it's not the right domain to be adding the passkey to. And so this is a great finding. The problem that we've found is deployments of WebAuthn and passwordless in corporate environments are stalling out. One is often administrators feel as if there's no need. We just, the whole industry just got told to put MFA in place. Why should I upgrade to passwordless now? If I'm sufficiently secure with MFA. And this isn't the worst attitude in the world, but it is sort of saying like traditional MFA is open to an adversary in the middle attack. So you're sort of leaving yourself open to some of these more advanced techniques. And so I would recommend that trying to overcome this sort of ability to say, this isn't something that's a priority, because it's only getting more and more, as those original slides show, more and more prevalent over time. Sometimes if you're worried about cost, there can be either, just change management cost or new hardware cost. That can be hard to get over. And there are also some areas where it's like, hey, phishing resistant MFA doesn't work on some of these legacy use cases or other areas in my environment. So these are reasons why people don't do phishing resistant MFA at the moment. I would argue that all of them are reasonable. I would still say that in light of them, it's always better to be pushing forward and trying to get a phishing resistant MFA wherever you can, even if you run into some barriers at some point. Because then if you get it as far as you can, coverage is as wide as you can in your environment, the next thing you should do is get at least MFA everywhere else. So I understand that there are going to be some road bumps to getting to that phishing resistant MFA in every use case. But once you get to those road bumps and they become too severe to continue pushing for new areas, getting traditional MFA everywhere else is really important. Because basically broad coverage of MFA is definitely better than nothing. The next thing I want to highlight is thinking about access policy. So there are a lot of different tools that can help you do this, but I think that the key ones to focus on are implementing device trust policy. This is a way to make sure that devices, that you have a certain level of access or authentication required from trusted devices versus bring your own device versus managed devices, making sure that maybe for certain applications only managed devices are allowed to access those resources, things like that. I think that's really helpful in mitigating a lot of these threats. Implementing tighter policy based on location and IP address. IP is notoriously sort of hard because people can obfuscate it. But even that being said, it should be kind of like if you don't do business in certain countries, tightening up access policy just reduces the access surface or attack surface. And implement some form of risk-based policy. This is, if this user traditionally accesses from this location, for me, it's, this home office. I always work from here. It should be a similar IP address, similar device most days. And then I jump somewhere else. Maybe I have to do a more stringent form of authentication. It's not going to block me, but maybe I have to do a stronger form of auth if all of my signals change. Just to zoom in on one of these right now, I think it's very interesting to think about device trust policy. To go back to my drawings here, basically, device trust policy adds on the requirement that, hey, you're only allowed through the authentication gate on a trusted horse, which can be kind of nice because if this is a user and they're showing their credentials, and we let them through. If you're an attacker with those same valid credentials, let's say they've effectively stolen the username and password of me. So they have my ted@acme.com email address. They have my, even if it's a long and complicated password, they have it, and they're presenting it to a web authentication gate. What's really nice about doing a device trust policy is if they're on the wrong horse, aka the wrong device, then you can say you're not allowed in. Basically, we know that those are the right credentials, but we also know that we only allow TED on, or those credentials should be associated with a trusted device, and you are not on that device, and therefore we don't let you in. And so that can be a really nice way to enforce access as well. If we think about tighter policy based on location or IP address, this just means attacker shows up with those valid credentials again, but they no longer fit the specifications to get through the door, because this attacker is not coming from the location we expect, not coming from the range of IPs we expect. So even though they have those valid credentials, they no longer fit the requirement, which has now been tightened to get through the door. And lastly, implement some form of risk-based policy. Risk-based policy uses pre-auth context at auth time. So basically, attacker with valid credentials, but with risky context. Hey, this is, they've just registered a new device. So these credentials are coming from a brand new device. Potentially then you're going to want to say, you're not allowed in. Or you must do a stronger form of authentication to get in. So let's go to the last piece here. So to get to the defense in depth, if we did pre-authentication at enforcement, afterwards implementing identity threat detection response, this is basically saying, the use case is the attacker got inside, they were able to move beyond your get by the authentication requirements or access policy for some reason, that maybe they were very, very sneaky. But this is the idea that you can really quickly detect that they've made it through. You see the things like admin impersonation in Okta, or a weak MFA was successfully used to sign in, or there are a variety of different things that might alert you to the presence of somebody inside your environment, and really quickly take a remediation action to boot them out. I think I saw this question come in on the previous session, but basically, it's not always the case that you'll want to make somebody relog out every time. You want to be very sure, if you're going to take the action, hey, you're going to get booted, that it is a real risk. And there should be a variety of steps that you can take, or sort of levels of intervention you can take. It can be a re-authentication only in a very risky scenario. It might just be that you have to do a stronger form of auth. Or there are other cases where it might not be at the level that you want to boot somebody out. So you should always have a range of intervention actions you take. But in this case, if you're really confident, a variety of alerts have gone off, then it's probably the best decision to boot the user out and make them have to re-authenticate. So with that, I basically just want to conclude by saying, we think that it's really important to get a defense in depth around identity, to put, you're going to want to gain identity visibility and posture management. Why do you want to do that? And this is in that pre-authentication portion. You want to do that to harden defensive proactively. This is, improving the MFA that's in use in your environment, getting rid of dormant accounts or inactive accounts, cleaning those things up, etc. At the time of auth, improving auth methods, improving access policy. This places a higher burden on attackers trying to get in the door. And then post-auth, implementing identity threat detection and response, reducing the blast radius of any incident when somebody gets through the door by detecting it very quickly and responding effectively. And so with that, here's some links and resources that if you want to screenshot this, you can. These are available on the website. I think there's also an associated PDF that you can get from this presentation, but happy to now move into Q&A.
Okay. Thank you very much. That was a great TED Talk, you might say.
Yeah, right.
Now, I do have to add here, Ted, that my art skills are probably on about the same level as yours, but maybe even worse. So I enjoyed that a lot. Now, I've thrown up the poll question here. Tell us what information you would like now about the Duo security solution. And I also wanted to follow up with what Ted said, that we have a terrific handout from Duo, which is an ebook about how to secure yourself against identity-based threats. It is free and you should download it now. Ted, you had so much great information that you have run right out of time for Q&A. I apologize for that, but I did want to ask you one question. For those who want to take the next step with Duo Security, what do you recommend they do right after this event?
If they're interested to check out, I would highly recommend going to our website. Our most recent stuff is on continuous identity security, which I think is really helpful. So that page under solutions, I think, is a great place to start. If there's anything more that you'd like to figure out, starting a trial or contacting sales are the ways to get in touch with us.
Absolutely. Well, fantastic stuff, Ted. Once again, thank you so much for being on with us today. It was a real pleasure.
Thanks so much.
All right, everyone. So there we go. Keep voting in the poll for Duo Security and how they should reach out to you for one more minute while I give away the next gift. And this one is a $300 Amazon card. We're giving them away every 30 minutes, as I said before, and thus far we're holding to that schedule. And the winner of the $300 Amazon gift card for this 30 minutes is Hussam Abdo from Washington. Congratulations to you, Hussam. We'll be in touch, as I say every single time. All right, folks, with that, let's move on to our next presentation in the MegaCast. This comes from Rubrik, and presenting for Rubrik today is Zoltan Diak, Director of Product Marketing. Zoltan, what a great name. He is ready to go, so I am going to hand the virtual mic over to him right now.
Hello, everyone. Welcome, and my name is Zoltan Diak, and I work on our security capabilities here at Rubrik. And today, I'm here to talk about defense in depth, or more specifically, how traditional defense in depth strategies don't go deep enough. At Rubrik, our mission is to secure the world's data. So I have a lot of conversations with customers about that data, specifically about protecting and securing that data. And the conversations almost always start off with preventing threats. How can I detect and prevent more threats faster across an ever-expanding IT landscape with adversaries that are becoming more and more sophisticated and attacks that are coming at greater volumes than ever? And it's a great conversation to have. We talk about different systems that organizations are implementing to secure their on-prem, cloud, or SaaS environments, and different strategies and frameworks that those companies are utilizing to prevent those threats. And inevitably, as we talk through this, it becomes a defense in depth conversation, because no one security system can do it all, right? Enterprise organizations tend to run somewhere between 50 to 75 different security tools. And of course, there's overlap across those. And I love looking at the kill chain as a framework for these types of discussions. It helps us understand and break down different things around how defense in depth works. How should it work, right? The idea behind defense in depth was breaking down a cyber attack into different phases and finding a means to disrupt every single phase of those attacks. So security organizations have a lot of great tools at their disposal now to, across the entire kill chain. across reconnaissance, weaponization, delivery, exploitation, installation, and command and control. We have those 50 to 75 different tools, right? And, that's somewhere in between network security, cloud security, endpoint security, and, other more point solutions. And I always ask the question, which of these tools is about defending your data specifically? All of these tools are really about preventing unauthorized access to your infrastructure. So there's nothing that has a sense of what your high value data is, your sensitive or regulated data. There's nothing that has a sense of where that data is or who has access to it. And when you look at the last stage, impact or action from objective, literally where the bad guys land and lay hands on your data, encrypt it, steal it, destroy it, whatever the case might be, there's virtually nothing in terms of capabilities you can use to prevent or disrupt the last stage. If we're not doing anything about that, our defense in depth simply isn't going deep enough. And this neglect of security at the data level is more important now than ever. Your data is growing faster than ever, and it's growing across those on-prem, cloud, and SaaS environments at record rates. Requirements for transparency of sensitive data breaches is increasing, as well as the fines behind them, as governments try to push private industry to invest more in securing their customers' private data. The number of attacks targeting data is increasing along with those things, as adversaries very much understand that your organization's data is the most valuable asset you have. And we've seen bad guys move beyond ransomware encryption to, double and triple extortion techniques. A great example of this is Clop ransomware that targeted a system last summer called MoveIt. This is an internet accessible file sharing application that they found a vulnerability in. And they could have just leveraged this in order to pivot internal to an environment and start deploying ransomware. But Fin11, the adversary group behind Clop, and they are a ransomware group historically, they didn't do that. Instead, they just stole the data, and they made so much money off of just the data theft and the extortion, that they actually became, for the couple months that this vulnerability was widespread, they became the most successful ransomware operator, extortion operator, just through the data theft. Over $100 million of ransomware payments were tracked in just that 2-month period. So attackers very well understand that going after your data is going to be very financially rewarding. And how are they doing it? It can be through vulnerabilities like MoveIt, the MoveIt vulnerability exploit, but often it's just compromising legit credentials. Over 80% of cyber attacks use identity-based techniques. So now we have attackers focusing on doing something they do very well, gaining access through compromised credentials and logging in instead of breaking in. And when they do that, they're bypassing all of your layers of defense in depth to access your data. All those systems heavily focus on securing your infrastructure. And when that happens, what happens when they bypass those systems through legit login credentials? What happens to your data? We see those capabilities getting bypassed day in and day out, right? And after adversaries bypass that infrastructure security, they virtually have free access to data, the stuff that hurts us the most, the stuff that we're truly trying to protect. So from an industry perspective, we're falling short here, right? Defense in depth is not going deep enough. We need to start thinking about data security from a data perspective. We need to start with data, understanding that data, because right? We can't defend it if we don't understand it. So how do we secure the data if attackers are logging in and not necessarily breaking in? As I mentioned, virtually any cyber attack today involves those stolen credentials, compromised identities, stolen access tokens, API keys, whatever it might be, right? So either for the initial access or for lateral movement. So how do you actually stop something if you don't have any IOCs you can use, or any file hashes or IPS signatures and so forth? So there's a couple things I think we should do when we think about data security. And of course, Rubrik provides these capabilities, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time here to go in depth in describing Rubrik's specific solutions and how they work. My goal is to make sure that you're aware that these strategies and capabilities exist and that you really should be using them. Rubrik provides them in a very differentiated way, and I'll touch on some of those things as we go along here, but I want to mostly focus on what you can be doing. So first of all, we have to stop thinking about solely about prevention, right? Of course, we want to prevent everything we can, but when we think about data security, it's all about managing risk and working towards cyber resilience. Because threats are going to get through your infrastructure security. At Rubrik, we think about what we can do before, during, and after an attack in order to maintain resiliency that'll help us the most when it comes to our data. So before an attack, there are things you can do to reduce your overall level of data exposure. That includes things like right-sizing who has access to data. So implementing least privileged access, removing redundant, obsolete, or trivial data. And of course, ensuring that you're backing up everything that matters into an immutable backup. The less you have exposed, the less damaging if you're breached. During an attack, it's all about being able to detect threats in your data that may have gotten past your perimeter defenses. If something's gotten in, you may already have damage, but if you can detect them before they've managed to exfiltrate a large volume of data or moved further laterally, you're minimizing that impact. And finally, after an attack, you of course want to be able to recover as quickly and as safely as possible. So if you can do these three things well, you can lower your overall risk and increase cyber resilience. So this is going deeper into our defense in depth, focusing on the data itself instead of the infrastructure. So let's drill into each of these things a bit. Let's start with before an attack. I mentioned earlier, securing data is about managing risk, and risk starts with that understanding of your risk. So you have to do some really good discovery to understand what data you're responsible for, because every asset of data that's in your environment, you're responsible for. And then you've got to get rid of all the stuff that doesn't serve the business purpose. So that's the first step, right? The second step is understanding what you still use in your business process. If you have regulated data assets on a production environment that are like 3, 4, 5 years old, do you need them on live systems? If the answer is no, archive it. Remove it from live systems because it still introduces risk. It gets out, you face regulatory fines. And that's what makes you pay the ransom, right? So third step, make sure the right people have access to the data and not everybody. And I know at first this may sound like, man, now you're talking about zero trust for data. I firmly believe that we'll never reach that nirvana state. Let's start simpler, where it's not an all or nothing kind of thing. There are simpler steps to use as a starting point. For example, if you're in the United States in California, employee records fall under CCPA. If you find yourself in a situation where the PII of your employees is accessible to everybody in the company, well, that's a lot of risk. But how many people work in HR? Maybe 3% of your employees? So let's just say that you only reduce access to people in HR. That reduced the risk from a CCPM or CCPA perspective to those PII records by 97%. That's pretty significant. And it's pretty easy to do. It's a starting point. And of course, you always want to make sure you have an immutable backup for the data that truly matters. About 96% of ransomware attacks today are, we're seeing that attackers are going after the backups. They know this is your ultimate life insurance, and they're specifically targeting it, so you'll be forced to pay their ransom. So Rubrik's data discovery and classification capabilities can help you accomplish all these things. They can help you reduce your sensitive data exposure and manage exfiltration risk by discovering what types of sensitive data you have and where it lives. We also have the ability to understand who has access to this data, so you can more easily implement least privilege access. And we're providing this capability throughout or through our enterprise backup solution, which means we're doing this without introducing additional scanners on your network in a production environment. We're scanning backup snapshots, which also means we're able to track all of your sensitive data and access to that sensitive data over time. So let's move on to during an attack. What happens if what I spoke about earlier comes true? Your infrastructure defenses have been bypassed, and now you have malicious files in your network, poised to attack your data. At that point, you've already been compromised, right? Defense in depth in this case means always scanning for threats to your data. Ransomware or other attacks might be lying dormant, conducting reconnaissance, moving laterally, or even start to begin encrypting data. Having a last line of defense to scan for those activities is critical. Again, with the focus on your data. Of course, we want to scan for IOCs, but and we can do that. Rubrik can help you do that. But there are also indicators in your data itself. Is your sensitive data being encrypted or duplicated? Is that data being downloaded? Is access to sensitive data expanding in an abnormal way? And we want to focus on that data that truly matters, that sensitive or regulated data. It's going to cripple your business, threaten your customers, or result in significant regulatory fines. Constantly monitoring for those things over time is going to help tip you off as to whether an attack is happening, so you can respond faster to contain the threat and minimize any potential damage. Rubrik also provides anomaly detection, in addition to the threat monitoring and threat hunting capabilities. And those things help you accomplish all of these things quickly and without putting additional load on your production environment. So threat monitoring is our proactive, always-on capability that scans your backups for threats. It utilizes threat intelligence from Rubrik Zero Labs, Google Mandiant, and other third-party sources to automatically scan your backups for the latest IOCs. Think of it as constant vigilance. You can set it and forget it. Threat hunting is our surgical tool, so you can use it to scan for specific IOCs. It's the fastest in the business. We have a proprietary architecture that allows us to scan thousands of backup images in seconds to minutes. So imagine your industry has been recently victimized by a specific threat, and the board calls wanting to know if you've been impacted. Threat hunting gives you the power to search hashes or Yara rules so you can determine if you're infected very, very quickly. And so, of course, after an attack, we want to be able to cover or to recover as quickly and safely as possible without reinfecting the environment. When it comes to recovering from a cyber attack, every second counts. So the faster you can recover, the less your business is impacted. And the good news is we generally know the things we need to accomplish to be able to recover. We need to understand what data was compromised. We need to know when that data was compromised so we understand what a safe recovery point is. And Rubrik's tools allow you to quickly identify these things and identify and quarantine any malicious files so we can prevent reinfection when we restore. And of course, there's the orchestration of actually restoring clean data and systems. So Rubrik's data remediation capabilities allow you to surgically and rapidly recover your apps, your files, objects, while avoiding that malware reinfection. So you can recover safely at any scale or granularity. So we enable you to quarantine that infected data, restore impacted applications, files, or objects. And of course, we can orchestrate the recovery of those applications. Rubrik provides all of these capabilities as part of our Rubrik Security Cloud. So how do we do it differently? Rubrik first made a name for itself, revolutionizing the enterprise data protection space. And we did a lot there, and we continue to do a lot to revolutionize that space. One of the ways we did that was by bringing data and metadata together. What I mean by that is when we take a backup snapshot, we're actually scanning the data we're backing up, so we learn a whole lot of interesting things about it. In other words, we have a whole lot of context about the data that we're protecting. And then our customers started coming to us and saying, hey, we love your backup and data protection, but the whole reason we back up our data is to be able to recover that data if something happens to it. And of course, one of the primary threats in today's world is cyber attacks. So we quickly realized that there's a whole lot of value to that data context that can help our customers before, during, and after a cyber attack. So what is that context? We're able to tell you where your data is stored. May sound simple, right? But in today's world where data is stored on-prem in multiple cloud environments and SaaS applications, and it's growing to a point where a typical organization is going to add 150 million sensitive data records in the next 5 years, all of that's really hard to track. What type of data is it? What's in it? Is it sensitive data, regulated data? How's that data changing over time? Who has access to it, and how's that access changing over time? Right? This is all tremendously powerful context. And before an attack, you can use it to audit your sensitive data. You can use it to minimize data exposure and incorporate least privileged access to reduce your risk. You can monitor your data for threats. During an attack, we can detect harmful changes like encryption and escalating access privileges faster. So organizations can limit that the blast radius or the impact of an attack. And then after an attack, this data context can help assess and report on the blast radius, identify a safe restore point, and help customers recover faster and safer. So these capabilities, they're critical to any modern defense in-depth strategy. We know with the growth of enterprise data and how valuable it is, it's the primary target of attackers. We know attacks are going to get through. Defense in depth should be not only about preventing as many threats as possible, it should go deeper to ensure that you're as resilient as possible in the face of successful attacks on your data. So we need to ensure defense in depth is applied with a focus on that data security. So Rubrik offers a much easier, much more efficient approach. Use what you already have in your enterprise backups through our native tools in the Rubrik Security Cloud, single platform, without the need to deploy and manage agents in a production environment, right? So Rubrik is really there for the entire data lifecycle, from the time data is stored and backed up to the time it could be potentially breached. Rubrik's the only platform that offers cyber recovery and cyber posture for enabling that cyber resilience under one umbrella without the need for third parties. All right, that's all my time for today. Thank you for taking the time to listen, and you can learn much more at rubrik.com. Thanks again.
And thank you, Zoltan. I just love saying that name. I might try to say it a few more times before we move on to our next one. Okay, please let us know what additional information you would like about the Rubrik solution. You can see the poll question up there right now. Please fill that out if you can for us. I also want to remind everyone about the handouts. We've got a link for more information about Rubrik. Be sure to check that out for more detail. Now, we did have some questions we can't get to right now. We are out of time, but Zoltan and the Rubrik team will do their best to respond to all these questions. So you may be hearing from Zoltan. He of the great name. Thanks to everybody for responding to the poll. And I'll just leave it up there for one more minute or so while we give away our next prize, which is a $300 Amazon gift card. No Kindle Scribe coming up this time, but we will have those coming up soon. The winner of the $300 Amazon gift card is Tom Neal from Pennsylvania, our second Pennsylvania winner today. Congrats to you, Tom. You'll be hearing from us. Now I'm going to move on to our next presentation in the MegaCast, and that presentation comes from Census. Presenting for Census is Celestine Yaren, Director of International Sales. Celestine, it is great to see you. She is ready to go, so I'm going to turn this over to her.
Welcome to the webinar on the top 5 risks of not investing in exposure management. I'm delighted to have you with us today. My name is Celestine Yaren. I'm the Director of International Sales at Census. As you might have guessed from the brief on this session, we're going to be spending today's session discussing exposure management as a whole. And you can really think of this session in 3 main parts, where we're analyzing what's changing in the current cybersecurity landscape that prompts a change in how we as security professionals operate. Secondly, what is exposure management fundamentally? What problems does it truly solve for us? And lastly, some of the risk-benefit analysis that you can factor into when or how to leverage an exposure management solution in your workflow. If you'll stick around for the next 20 or so minutes, we do have time for a few questions at the end or insights from folks today. There is a chat feature in this webinar, so go ahead and let us know as we go along if you have questions or reactions. Without further ado, let's get started. As promised, before we delve into how to prioritize exposure management overall, we're going to get started with what's changing out there for security professionals and defenders. Stepping back for a moment, in the last few years, we've been in the midst of a rapidly accelerating transition for businesses. To be competitive, organizations are scaling by leveraging multi-cloud environments, various softwares and suppliers, distributed workforces, automation, IoT. You've all heard it before. What this means for security teams, the ones that are tasked with protecting these organizations, is that we can't rely on the traditional inside-out security approach or the tools that got us there. Firstly, security teams are now responsible for far more people, assets, and services than ever before. So for example, if you think of simply the kind of multi-cloud adoption that we're going through, the average enterprise is running 1,200 to 1,300 cloud services to secure across AWS, GCP, Azure, Oracle, DigitalOcean. There's plenty of them out there. Adding to this complexity is the scope of our responsibility has changed across the vulnerabilities and misconfigurations whether they belong to us or to an acquired company or to a third-party supplier. And CVEs, absolutely 0 days, get the bulk of the news coverage when we think about MFT vulnerabilities or the Cisco iOS vulnerability or everybody's favorite celebrity vulnerability, Log4j. And the National Vulnerability Database has analyzed that over 24,000 vulnerabilities have happened this year alone. However, we also see that exposures, so misconfigurations, represent 88% of the exposures online. And at Census, we've recently reviewed thousands of exposed servers, which, if you're curious, is a published work called Dorking the Internet, looking into the leakage of sensitive information and databases and passwords. And for all of those where misconfiguration is a part of it, you don't need to be a sophisticated attacker to exploit such misconfigurations. Speaking of attackers, the attacker economy overall has become a lot less expensive and a lot more efficient. In a really telling test by Gray Noise in, must have been October of last year, they saw malicious and unknown connections happening every 3 minutes or so. So frankly, pretty much almost to the dot, as long as I've been talking, taking place on the internet. Meanwhile, in April of this year, there was another survey done on just security hygiene and posture management overall, in which we saw realistically 14% of organizations are scanning continuously. So 3 minutes, unknown connections by attackers, every 14% of organizations actually scanning continuously to match that kind of information. And it really has a tangible impact in terms of what we see and what we know about as security professionals. If you think back to that first point that I said about the proliferation of assets and services, 2/3 of organizations experienced an attack last year that started with an unknown asset. Meanwhile, even just with the thought about multi-cloud adoption, last year alone, 80% of incidents involved external cloud assets. Now, security teams have always needed to protect their attack surfaces. The challenge is that today, we're not dealing with a static problem or a problem that's growing slowly. What we're seeing is that the attack surfaces of organizations are growing 110% year over year, driven by the same factors: remote work or cloud migration adoption or IoT devices that accelerated our company's growth and our bottom line overall. And we're also seeing people operate in a way that's, not the direction we'd hope to see as security professionals, which is that Gartner is estimating by 2027, so in a few years from now, 75% of employees are going to start in some way leveraging shadow IT. Now, when I see correlation or causation stats that high, the first question I usually ask is, well, if it's that important, if it's that obvious, why hasn't somebody already solved this? And the answer is we've tried, right? Traditional tools that we use focus on known assets. They point at what we know about and investigate those specific things. But it's crucial to remember that attackers have an outside-in view, and they're looking for the low-hanging fruit, or the things that we would fix or prioritize within the list of things that we have to fix every single day if we just knew about it. And that is where exposure management comes into play. It's going to allow organizations to continually assess the visibility, the accessibility, or the vulnerability of all the digital assets in their environment. And at the heart of exposure management is external attack surface management, which is the tools that use automated internet scanning to identify and manage exposures. It lets security teams see their attack surfaces from the outside in, from the attacker's perspective, so they can start to understand their previously unknown assets and decide whether or not they're exposed. What you want to look for, or what you should be able to expect in exposure management solutions, usually has 4 pillars to it. So 1, they're monitoring exposures continuously. 2, they're discovering external assets for you. 3, they help you analyze the risks and vulnerabilities proactively. And 4, they fit within your current workflow of security processes, right? They inform the tools you already use. They fit into your remediation incident process just through the nature of the integrations and the context provided in the findings. Now, when it comes to exposure management being recognized as a solution as a whole, you don't need to just take my word for it or the word for Census of it. We're seeing a lot of organizations who have it all, so to speak, in terms of tooling, turn to exposure management to give them the visibility they still lack. This year alone, 92% of security leaders are either considering or deploying an EASM solution. And we see analyst firms like Forrester or Gartner making more predictions around these tools. Even the government agencies are leaning really into this kind of asset discovery and monitoring requirements with last year's binding operational directive. I think the number was 2301, if you want to look that up. or this year's White House strategy with the Biden and Harris administration. Now, every security tool or service, regardless of the investment, does require some kind of risk-benefit analysis. And I know I've had to, and I'm sure many people on this call have had to calculate the measurable return of either hiring for a new person or a new role on the team, or purchasing a new tool, or choosing one tool over another tool. So when you invest in exposure management, we're able to measurably minimize the impact of various downstream risks, which I'm going to take us through over the next few minutes. I'm going to give you 5 kind of top risks that we're able to reduce, which, with a couple of data points behind, will hopefully give you a good starting point for the journey that you're on as your organization as well. All right, let's get started with the first one that's the most straightforward for our business stakeholders. There's a really well-known adage among our community that if you haven't been breached as an organization, it's probably just that you don't know about it yet. And what we're seeing overall is the global cost of cybercrime has projected to triple from last year to 2027, going up from 8 to 24 trillion per year. So it's a really very kind of tangible price tag for organizations to contend with. And the cost includes not just the expected revenue loss from churned customers or disrupted business operations, or even the potential fines from a HIPAA or a GDPR violation, but it's also about the legal fees and the payouts to customers, or the increase in cybersecurity insurance premiums. There's also an element that ransomware victims usually strive, or we say that we're not going to pay hackers, but the harsh reality is that studies have shown 83% of ransomware victims do end up paying the ransom demand. And so that price tag adds to kind of the considerations that we have when it comes to an incident or a breach. Ransomware itself is a topic for another time. I'd highly recommend some of the census resources on that, but let's stay on track for exposure management today. So how does exposure management help when you think about a breach or an incident? By adopting an exposure management platform, you increase your chances of preventing a breach, reduce your time to detection, and increase the visibility of your risks beforehand so that you can make contextualized decisions. Again, it's worth highlighting that 88% of the risks we're seeing on the internet are misconfigurations and exposures, which are precisely the kinds of things that exposure management swiftly detects before threat actors can. I can't speak for all tools, but for Census in particular, when measured by Forrester, we were found to reduce the likelihood of a breach by 50% for our customers and the remediation time by 15%. Now, to double click on the left-hand side on that graphic over there around the potential outcomes of a breach, at the very top of the list is customer cost and reputation loss. And it's not just dollars at stake in that scenario, but also brand reputation and competitive positioning in the market and the trust of current and future customers. And while trust kind of feels really intangible, consider this. The World Economic Forum estimates that a quarter of a company's market value is directly tied to its reputation. Meanwhile, various studies have shown that 62% of Americans say, look, I'm not going to spend any further with a brand in the months after a breach. And more globally, PwC has shown that 87% of consumers are willing to take their business elsewhere in the event of a breach. And if you've ever worked at a company during or after an incident, you've probably felt this firsthand. I know I have. It's really tough to rebuild those relationships. And both the time that it took to remediate and be able to provide information to your customers, as well as how you handled it, really matters to them. So how can exposure management help? Well, beyond the likelihood of reducing an incident, which we talked about already, you can use it to bolster stakeholder confidence. Your security team can communicate, whether in an annual report or part of the processes that you share with customers and partners, that you're investing in advanced, proactive security solutions, which builds that trust and confidence in your brand. We've even seen insurance companies using Census in order to reduce their customers' risk and therefore reduce their own costs and claims, as well as their customers' premiums. Now, when you think about what we're protecting overall, the risks inherited there, you can really narrow it down to a couple of categories, but let's start with critical assets. So what I mean by critical assets is that under the definition of CISA, we're talking about the assets that help you maintain operations, achieve your organizational mission. This is servers, powering your proprietary software, or certificates, safeguarding financial data, or even offshore IT in manufacturing. And in critical sectors like energy or healthcare, that continuous automated detection is really fundamental, not just for their organization, but also in times for their economy or for national security. The federal government in the US has really underscored this importance by mandating that all federal agencies and their systems perform automated asset discovery every 7 days across their IPv4-based assets. So how does exposure management help in this case? Well, continuous monitoring of critical assets, to the extent that manual efforts and tools can't match, really saves a lot of time. It's also about being able to understand the context of the risk severity and the recommendations for remediation. For example, with Census, we found 30% more assets than an organization knew existed. And with this organization that I'm thinking about in particular in Asia, we found a number of S3 storage buckets that were just unknowingly leaking data publicly. There were some publicly read-writable elements, and they were able to remediate the ACLs on the misconfigured asset before any kind of data breach occurred, using Census to identify those. Now, if we zoom back out again to all your assets, there's another kind of key cost or risk area where lack of visibility can generate cloud sprawl or shadow IT, which in turn, we'll talk about how that impacts the security team as a whole in the next section. When I think about cloud sprawl, the things that I'm thinking about, for example, are that enterprises today estimate that 30% of their cloud budgets are spent on underused resources. We saw this really tangibly recently with a manufacturing organization using Census who had overspent their budget for 1 quarter by 8 million. Not their budget was 8 million, they'd overspent by 8 million. And when we looked into what those assets were, right, they used Census to identify what assets that they spent their money on and what was going on. They realized that the majority of them were assets that were kind of single use, not needed. They should have been spun down a long time ago. Set aside the security ramifications for that, just the cost alone, kind of staggering, right? What could we do if we had $8 million back? And employees with the best of intentions, anybody with a credit card on the team, are kind of prone to use unapproved SaaS resources, which also adds to the expenses that maybe weren't needed if they, had kind of properly gone through the regular channels. Now, exposure management really steps in here as a solution to these risks by uncovering those assets and creating opportunities to either enforce or reinforce security protocols across the organization. Imagine that 30% or even, let's say, that $8 million going back to an area of your organization that could actually use it and kind of move towards the business values. Now, lastly, thinking about a team that we have in security, right? The security team is very often comprising of highly skilled folks who really thrive in kind of strategic challenges, right? Whether that's integrating threat intelligence or conducting complex root analyses. But we're often bogged down by the kind of reoccurring time-consuming asset discovery or threat monitoring tasks. At 43% of organizations, manual asset discovery consumes over 80 hours in a month or in a week for some cases. That's 2 full weeks of effort from a dedicated security practitioner, and yet we still feel like we're missing things and we're still dealing with the after effects of not knowing about certain assets. For instance, a European government agency recently shared that prior to adopting Census, their security team spent about a week every month on asset enumeration. After using Census, they've reduced that same enumeration work to just 20 minutes. And that's a massive return in time for any team. Now, when exposure management kind of overall, as you think about that, where it plays a part in this is that it's giving you the data points you need on the assets that saves you some of that kind of time-consuming research into what's going on, who owns this, because it gives you a discovery path or it gives you the associated risks or their severity levels. Before exposure management tools, it's pretty common that we're kind of tracking down, what's the origin of this asset, what's the potential risk, and spending a lot of time doing that. But exposure management is meant to give you more of those insights so that you can very quickly say, oh, I know exactly where this asset came from based on these data points, and I can go talk to this other team immediately to resolve the issues. Census in particular was found to also reduce false positive findings by 70%, which of course no one wants to be tracking down false positives that are either false due to kind of poor attribution or due to lack of timeliness of results or stale data. So that's one area that we've been really proud of at Census. Now, I've called out Census on each of these points for a reason. Of course, you're on a Census call at the moment, but I'm also probably well overdue just to highlight what Census does maybe more uniquely in this space than just those stats. So Census is purpose-built to identify the things that security teams don't know about, the exposures they would fix if they just knew it was out there, right? And our exposure management platform gives you those proactive insights. So whether you're impacted by a misconfiguration or a zero-day like MoveIt, you're able to then take those risks and proactively respond before attackers do. And when I say we're purpose-built, we've been scanning the internet for the last 10 years, originally as the open source tool called ZMAP for those of you, or ZMAP for those of you in Europe, who remember back in the kind of early mid-2000s, right? And as the largest scanning infrastructure in the world today, so a long way away from where we started as ZMAP, we're now touching every internet-connected device every 3 to 4 minutes. And we've been on this call for, about 20 minutes now, I'd estimate. Can't see my clock behind the screen. But that's going to be, 5 times that we've touched every internet-connected device during this call alone. It's pretty quick. During that kind of real-time contextualized view, that's the kind of information that organizations who rely on Census look for, right? And so that's why, half of the Fortune 500 today rely on Census because they're able to remediate more assets, 30% more assets, and they're able to reduce their incident remediation time overall, which is what our bosses also really care about, right? Now, for any practitioners on the call, I'm going to give you a quick glimpse into the functionality that helps you reduce some of these risks that I've just described. So in the middle of this dashboard, you're seeing the attack surface of a sample organization, from their IPs to their certificates to their softwares, regrouping of the risks based on severity or use case or even geography, which will allow them to kind of prevent and remediate breaches faster. And from this page and from this kind of high-level dashboard, you're able to pivot into really detailed views of these findings, including by leveraging our risk engine to prioritize the most critical security weaknesses, leverage our discovery paths on each of the assets and the risks to understand and be able to communicate later to your team why something belongs to you that we didn't know about before, or to a specific team why you've attributed it to their work in the past. You're also able to leverage our cloud connectors to scan even faster across your cloud exposures. And all of this means that you're able to monitor those critical assets, identify new ones, and also operate within your security workflows by bringing that into your contextual security process that already exists. Now, if I think of, for example, NOS, the Portuguese ISP and Wi-Fi network in Portugal, they're the largest in Portugal. There was 3 things that really stood out to them when they went and started using Census. One was that comprehensive visibility, right? They were trying to proactively detect the vulnerabilities and be able to take risk actions quickly. The second was their risk framework that they were using with Census. So because Census has a configurable risk engine, you're able to identify the risks that matter the most to you. We follow at Census the NIST framework to begin with in terms of risk severity, but there are times when there's an asset out there that's a demo environment or needs to be deprioritized or higher prioritized based on the work that your kind of company does. And NOS found that they were able to reduce a lot of these irrelevant alerts that they had been dealing with and quickly address what was relevant and emerging to their organization. And the last thing that they really appreciated was the streamlined piece of it, right? So they were able to centralize a lot of their SOC operations and simplify their tracking and responding to alerts just by using Census and integrating it into their tool stack. And they really grounded, what I really appreciate about them is that they really grounded all of those decisions in serving their customers and stakeholders. Jose, their CTIO, so Chief Technology and Information Officer, pointed out that their customers rely on NOS 24/7 to provide connectivity and a great user experience to homes and businesses. You know, Wi-Fi and ISP, of course, that's kind of the core portion of their business. And Census is what allows them to achieve that mission with greater peace of mind that they can ensure that they're serving their customer base to the best of their ability. So ultimately, Census empowers your organization to prevent breaches, protect brand reputation and customers, gain visibility into critical assets, and reduce cloud sprawl and shadow IT. And lastly, saves your security team a lot of time and heartache. Now, I've mentioned a lot of stats today, all of which are available with their sources and exact references in our ebook on the 5 risks of not investing in exposure management. You can also reach out to myself or to the Census team. We would love to show you what the rest of the world can already see about your organization today. Thank you for joining us. We encourage you to explore the benefits of exposure management, and please, if there are any questions, drop them in the chat or contact us directly, and we are happy to help.
Thank you so much, Celestine. Great information. And I'm going to throw up the poll right now. Let us know how you want to hear from Census, what additional resources you would like from them going forward. And while you vote, I'd also like to remind you about the handouts once more. We have a PDF from Census all about exposure management, and be sure to check that out for more details. And we are out of time for questions right now. We are going to be moving along, but be assured that the Census team will be responding to every question that was asked, so have no fear. Thanks to everyone responding to the poll. We do appreciate that feedback. It is super important to us. I'm going to leave it up here while I give away more good stuff. Another $300 Amazon gift card. We have a winner chosen. Now, as we mentioned up top, you do have to be present for the entire event to be eligible to win any of our prizes. And the winner of the $300 card for this half hour is Armin Sarkeesian from California. And the winner of the second Kindle Scribe, the grand prize for today, is Philip Templeton from Tennessee. Congratulations to Armin and Philip, who will be hearing from us. All right, good stuff. Now we are moving on. We've got a couple of more great presentations ahead. How are you all doing? Are you staying lively and alert here? I sure hope so, because we've got some great stuff coming up now from Druva. And presenting for Druva is Neil Ashworth, Senior, Neil Ashworth, let me back up. Neil Ashworth, a Senior Solutions Architect, Security SME. He might be a senior or junior, I have no idea, but he is a Senior Solutions Architect and Security Subject Matter Expert. We are so glad to have you with us today, Neil. I am going to turn this over to you right now.
Hello and welcome to this Druva presentation on Defense in Depth, Do-It-Yourself Squared versus Software as a Service. I'm Neil Ashworth. I'm a Solutions Architect for Security here at Druva, and over the next 20 minutes or so, I'll explore what Defense in Depth means to us. Given that it's a partially subjective topic, it varies depending on an organisation's unique needs, such as risk profile, available resources and operating model. This gives a lot of freedom of discussion within the boundaries of a fairly well understood concept. So what is Defense in Depth? Well, as the name itself suggests, you don't have to be a security expert to understand that Defense in Depth is the process of layering security tools and methods so that an organisation isn't reliant on one single safeguard to secure their data. Now, since Defense in Depth is subjective, we have various frameworks to help guide organisations of all sizes towards a layered strategy of cyber defence. Like the NIST Special Publication 800-207 for Zero Trust Architecture. This understands that the boundary of perimeter defences is now much more difficult to define, and as such attempts to remove trust zones from the environment, moving that challenge response mechanism as close to the resource being accessed as possible. So that uses concepts of least privilege and need to know, along with strict access control. It's an architecture of maximum segmentation, and even provides frameworks for guidance on contextual connections between processes, both human and machine. The NIST Cybersecurity Framework uses 6 pillars to define key areas of focus for cyber resiliency: govern, identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. Each of them explores in much greater detail how an organisation would properly account for and put into place cyber controls for all organisational IT key personnel and processes, with the goal of making an organisation more resilient in the face of cyber threats. The ISO 27000 series focuses more on best practice recommendations for information security management. emphasizing layers in access control, physical security, and incident management. There are various other frameworks available that many organizations may explore to secure their systems, such as the NIS2 directive in the European Union, and that's for network and information systems. And the Centre for Internet Security has its own philosophical approach with its CIS controls, and that emphasizes multiple secure measures that overlap to create resilience. The point being is that there are many fairly broad in scope frameworks for defense in depth strategies. And many companies will likely use a myriad of different frameworks in order to employ cybersecurity in their environment. Although each framework has its own nuance, benefits, and specific focus, they're all designed to be applicable across a large swathe of industries and companies of all sizes. They're designed to raise the floor of security, and as such you'll find that they share many components and best practices. I wanted to discuss some of the commonalities across defense in depth, so I asked ChatGPT to aggregate data from existing information on the matter and give me a list of appropriate category headers used for cyber defense in depth. It outlined the following of perimeter security, edge technologies such as next-gen firewalls, intrusion detection systems, and threat intelligence platforms. It used the category of network security to encompass any types of micro or macro segmentation, such as VPCs or VLAN, or security groups, access control lists, etc. Endpoint security would cover technologies like antivirus, endpoint detection and response, XDR, patch management, vulnerability scanning. Application security involves the processes of security development lifecycle, CI/CD pipeline, API security, and the use of web application firewalls. Data security through the use of extensive encryption in transit and at rest, making sure that you take appropriate numbers of backups, tools like data loss prevention and data anomaly detection. Identity and access management is facilitated through the deployment of multi-factor authentication tools, single sign-on, role-based or attribute-based access control to establish least privilege access. Physical security, as you imagine, deals with the facility access and could even include HVAC controls, surveillance systems, and security personnel. An incident response, recovery, and monitoring is the establishment of a set of procedures and guidelines to help in the responsive actions of a cyber incident. It's also the establishment of a log aggregation and alert monitoring tool like a SIM, maybe even integration with orchestration, automation, and response tools. Using SOC teams to analyze the alerts generated for investigation. So, if we were to go back in time, even as short as 10 years ago, the practice of solutioning for data backup, data resiliency, and business continuity and disaster recovery, or BCDR, was very cumbersome. It involved an organization being much more hands-on, and security teams would need to effectively double their efforts to ensure data confidentiality, integrity, and availability, once for their primary environment and then again for their backup environment. They had to architect an appropriate solution and procure the infrastructure, but also project consumption 5 years out so they can right-size capacity, which invariably led to higher upfront costs and much lower early utilization. Then they'd have to apply all of the security hardening best practices to those systems to mitigate the blow of the operating system attack surface, or while also deploying their security safeguards, part of their own organization. I read recently that we're up to over 70 tools in enterprise organizations. Then the regular processes of keeping up with all of the upgrading and patching that entire stack. Not to mention trying to mitigate issues across different vendors, different technologies, which invariably leads to troubleshooting any issues with that backup environment. And all of this is almost antithetical to the goals of shifting our infrastructure to the cloud, Looking at these 8 defense in-depth categories, we instinctively associate them with tasks necessary to secure our primary environment, our primary data center. And we use models and frameworks to build resiliency against cyber threats and consider data backup as just another component to building resilient infrastructure. But enterprise backup is so much more than just copying data using the 3-2-1 rule. 3 copies of data on 2 different types of media and 1 copy off-site. Data protection solutions, especially those intended for the enterprise, need to be supported by servers and proxies, agents and networks and management interfaces. And that's all before we even begin to explore more sophisticated capabilities, such as data monitoring and alerting, data loss prevention, sensitive data search and governance, ransomware detection. How do we respond and recover, and integrations with other third-party tools? Backup technologies have their own extensive operating infrastructure. The last slide highlighted for us the complexity of building those solutions ourselves, effectively akin to building a replica data center, securing it, and then continuously maintaining that security. So if your IT and security teams are required for any of the processes of hardware purchase, installation, configuration, monitoring, or patch management of the solution that goes into supporting this enterprise backup, then you're doubling your labor. It's effectively do-it-yourself squared. So to begin the analysis of how SaaS solutions provide defense in depth, I'll begin by reviewing how we back up your data into Druva. Earlier, when I mentioned defense in-depth models, I referenced the NIST special publication for Zero Trust Architecture. In all honesty, it was influenced by my own biases on what good cyber-resilient architecture looks like. But also, coincidentally, it's how we approach securing the Druva data security cloud. First, with no on-prem infrastructure, you need only an agent, proxy, or secure API connection to begin securely moving your data into the Druva cloud. And with our global source deduplication engine, we're able to gain bandwidth efficiencies and savings across the storage tiers, resulting in a solution of high efficiency. Man-in-the-middle attacks are effectively mitigated through our use of encrypted channels, and source-side deduplication means that Druva's only ever sending fragments of data rather than full snapshots. The proxy or the agent also does the work of splitting the metadata from the data and sending those data shards to their appropriate storage bucket and NoSQL database. In the highly unlikely event of those packets being intercepted, the attacker would gain nothing but random data blocks. Perimeter security is as expected. Since we're using the public internet or direct connect to transfer that customer data into the Druva cloud, we ourselves are using AWS services, and we use AWS Web Application Firewall, Elastic Load Balancing, and content delivery. But most crucially, we force industry standard TLS over port 443. Similarly, physical security in a SaaS platform is provided for by the infrastructure provider, and in this instance, we're using AWS data centers, where security guards, fencing, and intrusion detection technology is used, as well as restricted physical access to only authorized personnel with valid business justifications. There is management of flood and seismic risks using physical barriers and threat detection technology, just to name a few. To protect the services within the cloud, we use multiple VPCs and non-routable subnets, using private link for service-to-service calls, which prevents the possibility of packets being intercepted. Our serverless compute resources are also included into their appropriate microsegmentation or security group policies, and all human accessible methods such as SSH have been disabled. Using AWS organizations also gives us the ability to securely structure organizational units. So creating or suspending new Druva accounts is possible within minutes, and we can allocate resources, group accounts, or organize workflows, and apply policies to accounts for governance and security compliance. And most importantly, audit log capture and retention. with CloudTrail Logstream for all accounts. By using OUs, we have the ability to record all user activities across all accounts and regions automatically. The logs are then stored securely and indefinitely in a separate, highly restricted AWS account in a security-hardened and tamper-proof S3 bucket. On top of that, we pushed the trail logs to our internal SIM tool to alert us in almost real time of any unusual activities before taking action to remediate any incidents. Our alerts were carefully designed to reduce noise and only deliver critical, actionable events so we can promptly take action. At Druva, we extensively use containerization technology for deploying applications in our cloud. Containers are a lightweight and portable way to package and deploy software, which makes them a perfect fit for our SaaS-based application. Containers also provide a high level of isolation between different applications, which is critical for our multi-tenant apps. Being one of the largest consumers of AWS data services in the world, we're very vigilant about and closely monitor our InfoSec score. So, our InfoSec score takes into account a variety of different factors, such as known vulnerabilities in the software packages included in the image, the age of the image and the overall size of the image. So with the InfoSec score as one metric to improve, the goal was pretty clear. We want all of our container images to have zero vulnerabilities, be regularly replaced with clean new images, and of a minimal possible size to reduce the vulnerability footprint. Druva mostly contains Docker images hosting microservices written in Go and Python languages. Go code is compiled into machine code, which is then packaged into a container. The benefit of Go's static linking and the ability to build a single binary executable make it easy to create small, self-contained container images. This is because there's no need to include the runtime environment in the container image, as the binary executable contains all of the necessary dependencies. Python, on the other hand, is an interpreted language, which means that it needs to have the Python interpreter and any necessary dependencies along with the application code included in the container image in order for it to run the code. This increases the size of the container image compared to a compiled language like Go, which only needs to include the binary executable. The average size of a Go-based Docker container is around 500 megabytes. While the Python-based Docker container were around 1.6 gigabytes. The generated software bill of materials, or SBOM, of the Go-based Docker image contained around 400 packages, and the Python-based image container contained at least over 500 packages. Most of the packages listed on the SBOM are introduced from the base OS layer of the container. We employed Docker Slim, which is a specifically built command of the tool, and executed it on the existing Go-based images. The same approach failed to work on the Python-based containers initially, as Python containers contained the code as well as the runtime for execution. So first we had to run PyInstaller utility to package our Python application along with its dependencies, and this enabled us to run the package application without installing the Python runtime or any modules inside the container. We could now pass the packaged Python container through that same Docker Slim build command to create a slimmed package version of the images. What resulted from this was the Go image became 11 times smaller, reducing packages from around 400 to approximately 50. Similarly, the Python image was reduced in size by over 8 times, reducing the package from around 500 to less than 100 packages. The benefits of vastly reducing the attack surface are plain to see. We went from identifying over 125 critical vulnerabilities and exposures in the package to 0 CVEs after slimming. The slimmed version of the container image also makes the deployment smooth, fast and cost efficient. The slimmed images are light on the disk, therefore reducing AWS ECR costs. And the small size containers are faster to pull, resulting in faster deployment times. We observed up to 90% faster push and pull of slimmed container images as compared to actual images. and we spawn over 6,000 container images in the production environment every couple of weeks. So this is a huge value add to our organization and to our customers. So this slide does look complicated, but if we move from the bottom up, it makes much more sense. So number 1 outlines what we've already discussed, in that secure connections are made between the customer data sources and the Druva Data Security Cloud. And by separating the metadata from the data and performing source-side deduplication, where we're able to capture all of those changed data blocks, we only end up storing fragments of data rather than the whole data set. And we store them encrypted. And at no time does Druva ever have access to the keys to decrypt the data, since they're wrapped in an envelope encryption process using a key encryption key held by the customer. Number 2 highlights the optional use of a Druva Cloud Cache appliance. And this is for customers who are operating with very specific, i.e. sub 5-minute RPO and RTO requirements. Point 3, one tier up from the bottom, highlights that our cloud is regularly measured and validated against industry standards for cloud computing. Point 4 emphasizes the operational and performance benefits of a SaaS architecture for data protection. We're able to do auto-scaling for resources when needed. Ransomware is a Black Friday event. You don't need all of these resources, and then all of a sudden, bam, you do. You need to be able to spin up resources in order to be able to scan lots of your primary data center snapshots in parallel. This also allows us to achieve things like auto-archival, auto-redundancy and resiliency with multi-region storage. And point 5, atop of all of this hardened and secured architecture, we're able to deliver several great benefits to our customers, effectively using backup as a security forensics data lake. The management UI can be configured to support role-based access control to prevent permissions sprawl and using single sign-on and multi-factor authentication to help create a root of trust access. But also, using data analysis, we may also be able to provide early warning of suspicious or anomalous activity, such as data deletions, modification events, or ransomware execution. Tying those insights into the existing SIM workflow helps provide another unique intel feed to early warning systems. And that's all great and valuable information to take away, but from a customer experience, we're also very well aware that data protection solutions are often set it and forget it utilities. Necessary and crucial as part of a robust cybersecurity strategy, but not something that should require a great deal of attention. And to that end, we include for all of our customers the support of a 24/7 by 365 Druva managed data detection and response team. This team monitors cloud telemetry, providing insights on Druva cloud activity, and can start proactively alerting customers experiencing an attack who may not yet be aware of a compromise or suspicious activity, especially not aware of it in their backup environment. This helps accelerate response time to active threats and provides experienced support to help with event analysis, running pre-built response runbooks and helping lock down the backups to safeguard the data, and supporting the ongoing efforts of the organization to re-establish control over their environment and their data. So now when we revisit the basic concepts of defense in depth, after exploring how a SaaS data protection platform would apply a layered cyber resilience strategy, we can appreciate that the complexity and labor that's involved is exponential. And hopefully at this point we agree that a SaaS approach, which is basically taking all of that risk and transferring it, is a much more palatable approach than the alternative do-it-yourself squared. There's so much I wasn't able to cover today given the time, but if you'd like to learn more about Druva, we have some information available in our data security white paper. If you've heard enough and you actually want to see the product in action, we offer a fully self-service product tour where you can see the simplicity of the Druva Data Security Cloud in person. I want to thank you all for your time and attention today. I hope you found this presentation interesting and maybe a little informative. And if you have any questions, hopefully I can answer them during the next few minutes. Thank you so much.
And thank you, Neil. Wow, great information, great presentation. And I've put up the poll question for everyone while we go over or get the questions ready for Neil. And please vote now what additional information you would like about the Druva solution. Let us know. And also, while we get the questions ready, I wanted to remind you that we have got a great handout from Druva, a PDF that goes into more detail on a modern approach to data security. So be sure to check that out. Okay, Neil, we do not have time for a lot of questions, but let's try to get a couple of quick ones in today. And the first one for you is this. How does Druva use AI, artificial intelligence? That's something on everyone's mind these days.
Oh, hi. Yeah, sure. Yeah, so we're using AI in a couple of very interesting ways. One of the first ways that we're doing it is because we're cognizantly aware of the fact that data protection, data security platform isn't often accessed. When you do go into the platform, you don't necessarily want to be bouncing around different consoles in order to achieve your troubleshooting or normal restore and backup activities. So our initial AI platform is called Drew Investigate, which you can just use normal plain language to ask questions like, why did that backup fail? What are there assets that are not currently being backed up? Things like that, and be provided very easy to understand steps to take forward, even product demonstrations to walk you through the aspects of the platform that you may be less familiar with. We're taking that concept further to help with security forensics and security analysis procedures. So mostly we use ML in the platform to increase the clarity around alerts and make sure that we don't get false positives. But we are experimenting with large language models to help the facilitation of the platform be easier. But yeah, lots of areas that we're excited about.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. Okay, one more question for today, and I want to remind everyone to keep voting in the poll in the meantime. So, here's someone wants to know, does Druva support backups for the public sector?
Yes, we do support backups for the public sector. We are FedRAMP moderate assessed in our platform, which operates in the AWS GovCloud environment. So we do have quite a large number of public sector accounts, and we're looking to expand on that in the future with continued validation of the platform and assessments and things like that.
That is great to hear. Always love hearing from Druva on what they're doing. Such an innovative company. And Neil, I want to thank you for your time today, for that fantastic presentation, and for your time in the Q&A. It was a real pleasure to have you on.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. All right, everyone. And while you take one more minute to vote in that poll and to download the Druva handout there, I'm going to give away our next to last $300 Amazon gift card. And the winner of this latest one is Jeff Tice from North Carolina. Congratulations to you, Jeff. And with that, folks, we have arrived at the final presentation in today's MegaCast. And this one comes from Teleport. Presenting for Teleport is Stephen Martin, Specialist Solutions Engineer. It is always a pleasure to have Teleport with us. And Stephen, it is a pleasure to have you here today. I am going to turn this over to you right now. You have the floor, sir.
Hi, this is Stephen Martin. I'm a solution engineer here at Teleport, and I'll be stepping you through how Teleport provides the ability to have infrastructure, defense, and depth. Now, in terms of what Teleport provides, that's an on-demand, least privileged access to infrastructure based on a foundation of identity security and zero trust with built-in identity and policy governance. Now, in terms of when we talk about infrastructure defense in depth, that's implementing an additional layer of security over the identity provider with protected mechanisms, configurations that defend against threats. That security layer needs to be present in the service providers, trusting the IDP as a source of authentication for users. So being able to add on, as you'll see in our demonstration, how to add requirements for MFA, requiring trusted devices, and also being able to respond to possible threats and locking out users or machine operators that may not be, correctly accessing services. In terms of, what this provides us is an approach to help the identity provider and the defense and depth provider to work together to strengthen that end user security that we all want. Now, in terms of Teleport's access platform, we provide 3 products. At the base is our Teleport Access, going off a secretless authentication and ephemeral privileges approach with zero trust and using cryptographic identities. We have Teleport Identity, that provides a set of critical features required for enterprises to govern identities. And then we also have policy that allows you to see, what people are doing, and what they're accessing. Now let's go ahead and step into our demo of how we provide, infrastructure defense in depth. All right, so let's step in. Here we have Bob that has a certain set of resources by default. We can see that these are labeled with the environment dev. Now these are a set of initial resources, types of server, apps, database, Kubernetes, and desktop. These are, again, his just enough access. What does he need, day by day to access things? If he needs to work with some other resources, which we'll see in a bit, he can request those, and those are available, directly or through our access request page. Now, in terms of accessing resource, very straightforward. In this case, Bob can jump right into an interaction, start things like htop, interact. Now, as part of the integration, with Teleport, we've not just given Bob access into this SSH service, but we've also allowed him to do some pseudo writes. For example, he can restart the nginx service that is on this box. Now that is available to him. If he tried to also, while he has that pseudo writes, if he tried to do something else like directly restart a teleport service, that is not allowed. So we've not granted that to Bob, even though he's excited to do that. Now, in terms of every time we start a session like that, that is being monitored. So we can see here, we have Bob, connected into his machine. Along with that, we could have required either an observer, moderator, to join that in order for him to start it. So that's something you can also add in as part of your defense and infrastructure, that in order to start certain sessions, you can require that. The system is going to be tracking, as he goes. Now, if Bob needs to connect to another machine, you can simply select another session. Now, in this case, he's going to connect to a different machine. Now, there is a different requirement on this machine that has been incorporated, that he must provide an MFA. So that's, again, an additional confirmation. So when he accesses a particular resource, it will issue a very short-term certificate, and that's what enables him to get on this machine. Now, when Bob is ready, he can simply exit, one machine. He keeps his set of resources. These maintain available, being monitored. You can see here we only have the one session going. Now, besides, this active sessions happening, we have our audit log that's being done. So everything Bob's been doing here is being tracked in terms of new sessions, easily viewable in a JSON or exportable into a SIM. In the particulars of, what user from Teleport came in, exactly, what login they use on an SSH machine, if this was a direct SSH command, and then what labels were on there. So if we ever need to go back and want to verify, well, how did he get in? What were on those labels at the time? We can confirm that here. Now, in terms of recordings, so each of those sessions are recorded and are playable back directly in this viewer. While it may look like an actual video, this is really text. So you can navigate it. replay it at certain points, and even select the text, as it goes. If I ever want to select a particular command that he did, that's available. Now, once I access an audit log, a session recording, that is, recorded that I did that. So if that's also something, if someone ever came back and accessed different session recordings that you weren't expecting them to, that is tracked in terms of the immutable audit log. Now, in terms of, so those are his day-to-day set of resources. You can see how we required that Bob provide some additional verification once done. If he needs to get into other areas, such as they might have to get into a particular fraud system, or get into Kubernetes, or even, a database, these can all be added into a resource request. In terms of when that's used, so if there's a particular job that needed to be done, by Bob, you can say, well, I'm not necessarily going to start this today, but maybe I want to start tomorrow. You can have certain access durations. The max is 14 days. And you might say, well, I'm really going to be able to get that job quickly. Confirm what authorized job it is. So in this case, he's providing a request reason, and then Bob can submit that. Now, when you have a particular request that can be submitted and reviewed by one or more people on a team, that can also be reviewed by automated jobs. So if you have a particular ops genie or perhaps a PagerDuty that can review and confirm based on either an on-call for the user, or perhaps, as I did, I put in a particular authorized job and it was able to confirm that. Now, once that's approved, I then have that expiry time where I can assume the roles and then go directly into the request. So you can see it has been assumed. I'm able to go into those particular resources. You notice it just has the resources I requested, and I can jump in. Now, in this case, again, because this is a sensitive system, we don't just want people jumping right into a particular resource, without confirmation. So in this case, again, we give our MFA, and we're in the system. So in this case, we've gone through examples of how teleport protects key resources, requires additional verification of identity when accessing sensitive resources, how a user can use access requests to get into sensitive systems to complete their work, and done. We're just gonna leave this while we go over and also look at, well, how was Bob, configured to allow access here. And for that, we're going to step over to my user, Stephen. You can see I've logged in, have a similar set of just enough access, but also have some additional privileges in terms of looking at things like, the access graph and teleport policy. So going into the access graph, we can take a look at, what is Bob assigned? We can see the set of user roles. We saw about the sensitive access and going in there. And as we jump in, we get an in-depth view of Bob's day-to-day access and what he can request. So in this case, we see here Bob, have access, jumping into some of the machines and things we already saw available. So that's his default access. We also have that MFA confirmation that requires him to use MFA when connected there. But in addition to that, we also have, well, what can Bob request? So you notice the dash lines indicate requesting items, not something that you necessarily have by default. So these are the set of resources that can be requested by Bob, but are not directly accessible by him. And you'll notice that we have another line here for an access request. So this is a temporary role that allows Bob to get access as you saw him doing, and getting into particular machines, but not all the machines, because that's how it was needed for the job. Now, This is helpful for left to right. We can see how these roles were assigned along with access group, and we'll step in a little bit about how access lists work. But, going from left to right is great, but what if we want to see, well, what else could get into, systems like this? And then we can take a look at this access graph. So from here, we can see that this training item has this allowed, these set of users that are able to request that. Also our set of users that are also in this access list. And right now, Bob is the one there. So we've seen someone who has current access into this machine, and also who else could potentially, have access in real time. We also have an area called Crown Jewels. So in this case, I want to watch what's happening to Bob. So prior to this, I'd already set up something where I want to watch what changes with Bob. And in this case, his access request changes. So in real time, he did this access request. So if I wanted to know not just his day-to-day changes, but when he does access requests, that's something I'm watching in real time as part of our Crown Jewel functionality. Now, one area I mentioned there was around access lists as part of our identity. So access lists allow us to, originally we map from the IDP into a set of roles that Teleport maintains for their access. In some cases, you don't necessarily want to just take on the roles directly from an IDP, but you also want to keep an access list that maintains, certain users have access list. In this case, this gave Bob the right to do a request access. So to be on that list, to be able to request like production or other areas, Bob has to be on this list, and we're giving them that. We maintain it. We have an audit, so that way we can keep compliant and make sure that we're checking this list periodically. So it's not something that Bob is, just always has by default. And this is my particular project that later we expect to take some of these people off. Access lists can also be utilized to do the IDP sync, so that if you want to keep a set of groups, who's on a particular group in your IDP, as well as applications, that can be done through Teleport. So that allows you to maintain it from Teleport and then keep it in, proper sync easily. Now, in terms of some other areas that help us keep that, defense and infrastructure, we have our set of session and IDP, where we may want to maintain. We'll come back to that in a little bit. We also have our access monitoring. So access monitoring allows us to run, real-time reports that are based either last 7 days to 120 days, based on common patterns where we see concerns. So in this case, you can see a set of reports that have been run, in this case, identifying perhaps some database sessions, SSH sessions. And while I can see this in my real-time dashboard here, I can also get the particular query and then run that directly from here. So this allows me at any point, to run a particular query to look for concerns. And I can also make my own queries and run them to see concerns of, okay, are you accessing a particular system? Is it over, these set of resources, any area to help identify, any unusual behavior that are happening with infrastructure. And that was part of why, originally you saw me do an MFA, and part of our recommendations to make sure to use those kind of instructions. Now, another area that is critical to help keeping your infrastructure is using things like, trusted devices. So that's where you might, want to require to get into particular resources, but that's only from trusted devices. So devices that have been registered in Teleport, and we can cryptographically confirm against, their things like their motherboard to make sure that it's the right device. So in this case, you can see my user. When I originally logged in with this user, I did not confirm this session with device trust. So if I try to launch against an app like this Elastic, it's not allowed. You do need to use that with there. So in order to do that, I'm going to log out, and then I'm going to log back in. But in this case, it's going to prompt me to confirm my device, and that's using our desktop graphical user interface, Teleport Connect, which allows us to confirm both our device as well as access resources locally from our desktop, and it can allow me to easily connect right in. In this case, I'll say, yep, I want to launch that web session. So now you can see I have verified, and that changes that I am with an authorized device. Now, I could have also made it where any resource you do requires an authorized device. In this case, I'm letting them get away with just accessing certain ones and maybe doing that MFA you saw me before. But once I do that, that does allow me to then reattempt with that particular application. It has verified my device and confirmed that I should be in there. Again, doing that end-to-end confirmation before allowing me access to a particular resource. Now, in terms of our audit log, that will track, again, things of that nature. Have I confirmed web authentication? So all of that is, again, tracked here. And again, come to a SIM and these things of that nature. Now, also, we have that, well, what if we do see problems or do have concerns or need some real-time offboarding? That can be completed by our identity locks. Now, in terms of here, we might say, okay, what's happening in our system? We say we have a session there, and we know that Bob has recently had to leave for the day and did not get to complete his tasks. So we have a concern that we've been informed of that. He does have sessions running, and we do not want to leave them open in case they're potentially inappropriate usage there. So in that case, we can go back, provide a lock, add it to a target, allow it to leave. I'll set that for 8 hours when you can, re-authenticate and go. But what the lock does give us is that this will disconnect. So it does not lock because I put on that 8-hour access. It does not lock Bob from coming in after 8 hours, but for now, he's denied from the system. And we're tracking that through our locks. So by applying things like our locks, we're then able to make sure that in real time we can terminate any concerns about inappropriate access or access that should have been shut off at the right time, whether someone has offboarded or is temporarily unavailable and should not have any further sessions open. This can also be applied to things like our machine operators, our bots. So this gives you real control in terms of your infrastructure of not just granting the access with the right authorization, but also terminating it. If you end up in a situation where there is too much access. So just to review, we've gone through demonstrating how Teleport authorizes access to particular resources, how it confirms their identity in real time, both from required MFA or trusted devices. We've shown how we monitor not just the user, but also the entire infrastructure in terms of who's accessing and what they're accessing in real time. We've walked through how they follow a zero trust approach to request access to sensitive resources. We've also shown how if there is any concern about particular sessions or users, we can lock them out in real time, and that user will be reviewed. Now, in terms of next steps, we recommend reading a particular white paper that helps to review about how to harden your infrastructure. Really recommend that as next steps for you, and hope you've enjoyed this session. Thank you.
And thank you. Stephen. Wow, that was a fantastic presentation. I loved the demo, so in depth. Showed us how the product works, and that is one of the most important things for all of us. We want to see it work in the real world, so that was extremely useful for us. And now I'm going to put up the poll question. Well, I've already put up the poll question. Let me be a little more accurate. Please let us know, as you have done before, what additional information you would like about the teleport solution. Keep voting in that poll while we get to some questions put together. I also want to remind everyone about the handouts. We have got a PDF from Teleport about defending against identity provider compromise. That sounds really good. So head over to the handouts section and download that while we get some questions ready. Now, joining us for Teleport is not going to be Stephen Martin. That's too bad, because I wanted to make some Steve Martin jokes, but I can't do that. I'm going to have to make do with Dan Johns, and that's all right as well. Dan, thanks for being on with us here this afternoon.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to be here.
Yeah, for sure. Or this morning, this evening, wherever everyone is. I shouldn't say this afternoon, just because it is where I am in Maryland. Now, let's dive into some of these questions. So first question up today for you, Dan, is can Teleport meet U.S. federal requirements such as FedRAMP?
Yeah, absolutely. And we are deployed in numerous FedRAMP environments where we assist our customers. FedRAMP introduces a lot of really tight controls that Teleport can help meet. Things like access control, auditing, configuration management, identification and authentication controls, as well as mandates around encryption and communication. Teleport's able to check a lot of those boxes right out of the gate with our customers that are currently using the tool.
Okay, that is great to know that you work in those environments. So a second question for you today, Dan. What MFA types, in other words, multi-factor authentication types, does Teleport support?
Sure. So in customer environments today, most customers are using some kind of single sign-on environment. So they have something in place with Okta or Entra ID or Active Directory that has its own multi-factor authentication. In addition to supporting all of those tools, Teleport can then add an additional check using WebAuthn. So think of something like a YubiKey or Touch ID, along with one-time password support from things like Google Authenticator or Authy. And we also have support for trusted device enforcement from something like an enrolled hardware, like your laptop, for example, to enforce the actual physical hardware connecting to Teleport.
That is very nice to see so many types of MFA supported. So next question is kind of related. What types of integrations does Teleport Policy support?
Sure. So Teleport Policy supports single sign-on through something like Okta. We also then are able to analyze patterns that we're seeing through something like AWS utilizing IAM. Similarly, we can inspect the same things from something like Entra through something like Azure. We can also analyze GitLab policies, and we have just started rolling out support for SSH key scanning as well. So we're actually able to inspect the keys on like a Linux device and identify those as a potential path into a machine.
Great. Love to hear that. None of us live in silos anymore. We just can't. So it is very important to not get locked in and to support a wide range of services. And that is so good to hear. Okay. Next up for you today, Dan, really interesting question here. Is Teleport certified?
We are. So our customers have to support a wide variety of compliance standards, and we're able to help them achieve things like we previously discussed with FedRAMP. But in addition to that, Teleport itself audits for SOC 2 Type 2 compliance, ISO 27001, HIPAA, and PCI DSS 4.0.
Okay. So fully certified in all the important ways. All right. Let's see. I think we have time for one more question for you before we let you go. And Warren wants to know, is Teleport relevant in educational institutions?
It certainly can be for a variety of reasons. For one, educational institutions have to support things like a lot of internal web apps. There's also a lot of administration that goes into tighter access control. With things like system administrators that work for, say, a school district or something like that. Granting access to something like, say, multiple servers or websites that are all controlled by a school district and making those access patterns easily reachable without having to figure out, do I have to create a VPN for, every single school that I'm managing, for example. Those can be very painful, and Teleport can certainly help optimize those through our role-based access control, along with easier network configuration to make sure that you have access to the tools that you need without having to put, sensitive configurations on the open internet.
Okay, fantastic. Now, one more question before I let you go today, and you've certainly generated a lot of interest with the presentation and these questions. Somebody wants to get started with Teleport. What should their next step be?
Sure. So if you head over to our website, go to teleport.com, there's a button where you can click to get started. And that'll set you up with a 2-week trial of one of our Teleport Enterprise Cloud offerings, and you can go ahead and start clicking some buttons.
Okay. Clicking buttons is always a lot of fun. Well, Dan, thank you so much for being on today. Thanks for educating us on what Teleport is doing. A lot of great innovation coming out of there. And thank you for dropping knowledge on us today. It was a real delight to have you on.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Okay. Thank you. All right, everyone, we are starting to wind down now. I'm going to leave this poll question up a little bit longer, so please keep voting in the Teleport poll here, and remember to download their handout as well. Now, we have got 2 more prizes to give away before we let you go today, and that is first a $300 Amazon gift card, the last one of the event. And the winner of that is Jessica Sampson from New Hampshire. And we have one more Kindle Scribe grand prize to give away. So are you all holding your breath? The winner of the Kindle Scribe for this event, the very last one, is Dan Ivan from Michigan. Well, congratulations to all of our winners today. There were a ton of you on this MegaCast. We are going to be following up with each and every one of you. So even if you didn't hear your name called, but maybe you missed or whatever, you will be hearing from us. You will not miss your prize. So have no fear about that. Well, folks, I don't know about you, but I had an absolutely amazing day today. It was so much fun. So much learning went on. And I hope you thought so too. If that is the case, I wanted to mention that we can do something like this for your platform or solution. We have got multi-vendor events like this. We have got single vendor events crafted just for you as well. So if you're interested in following up, hit us up at connect@actualtechmedia.com so we can help you determine which of our multitude of events would be a good fit for you. We would love to talk with you more. So don't hesitate and reach out to us. And so I wanted to mention, in terms of security, you learned so much about security today. Another area of security that is so crucial is API security. And we have got an event about that coming up next week. In fact, 1 week from today, October 2nd. That is one day before my birthday. Thought I'd throw that out there. And it's on API security, detecting, monitoring, and securing application programming interfaces. And I cannot wait for that one. If that is of interest to you, that's going to be happening at noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific time next Wednesday, October 2nd, 2024. And with that, folks, we are just about out of time now. On behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank all of our presenters today for putting together fantastic informational presentations and demos and Q&A insights. So much goodness coming your way. And those who made it possible include Veeam, Atka, Cisco Duo, Rubrik, Census, Druva, and Teleport. Woof! What a fantastic day. I enjoyed it so much. I love being on here. Thanks to all of you attendees for being here with us, for spending this long, long day with us. I hope it was a great experience for you. And I cannot wait to see you in our next event. This has been a pleasure for me. And I want all of you to have a great rest of your day. Now you get a chance to stretch your legs, have another beverage. Enjoy it, folks. I'll see you next time.